The church bathroom smelled of cold stone and candle wax, and the particular kind of quiet that settled over places where people came to pray. Sofia Mancini didn't pray much anymore. She wasn't sure what she'd say if she tried. But she was pressed against the tiled wall of the last stall with her back straight and her daughter's hand small and warm in both of hers. And she was listening for footsteps the way she'd learned to listen, with her whole body, with the hairs on the back of her neck, with the breath she was holding at the very bottom of her lungs. The organ music drifted down the corridor from the nave like something from another world. Something soft and clean and untouched by any of the things Sofia carried. Her cousin Julia was probably already at the altar, her ivory dress pooling on the marble, her face doing the thing it always did at weddings that open, unguarded weeping that had embarrassed her as a child and now seemed like the truest thing about her. Julia cried at every wedding she'd ever attended. She had prepared her whole life to cry at her own. Sofia had not cried at her own wedding. She had been too busy being absolutely certain she was making the right choice. Emilia stood pressed against her hip, small and warm in her white dress with the satin sash Sofia had ironed twice that morning. Her daughter's dark curls were pulled back with a pearl clip that had belonged to Sofia's grandmother, and her patent shoes were still unscuffed, which was a minor miracle considering the child had spent most of the morning trying to sprint through the church garden after a stray cat. She was 4 years old, and she had her mother's eyes and the particular serenity of a person who has not yet learned what the world expects her to be afraid of. "Mama," Emilia whispered. She had already learned, at 4 years old, that some situations called for whispering. The learning of that had cost Sofia more than she would ever let herself calculate. "Is the game almost over?" "Almost," Sofia said. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "There's a spider in the corner." A pause. "I'm not scared of it." Sofia pressed her lips together against the laugh that would have come easily on a different day, in a different life. "That's very brave, baby." "I know," Emilia agreed, with the serene confidence of someone who had not yet learned that the world's real dangers were not spiders in bathroom corners. Through the gap under the stall door, Sofia could see the pale marble floor leading to the corridor. She had been standing here for 12 minutes. She knew because she had been counting the seconds the way she had learned to count them in the bad years, the way you counted when silence itself became something to measure. 12 minutes since she had looked through the small rectangular window in the corridor wall, the one meant for ventilation, positioned at just the right angle, and seen him in the last pew on the left side of the nave. Rocco Sava, her ex-husband, the man the family court had issued a restraining order against 14 months ago, a piece of paper that had turned out to be approximately as useful as Sofia had feared it would be. He'd been wearing his dark blue suit, the one she'd chosen for him in their second year of marriage, back when she still believed that if she managed the right variables, kept everything smooth enough, it would be fine. He'd had his arms folded and his jaw set, and his eyes moving across the backs of heads in the pews like a man conducting an inventory of what was his. She'd backed away before he could scan as far as the side corridor. She'd taken Emilia's hand, and she'd done the only thing she could think of. She'd come here. If you're already caught up in this story, hit that like button and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it means the world to me. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to them. Her phone had 4% battery. She had forgotten to charge it the night before because she had been up until 2 in the morning hemming the sash on Emilia's dress, because she had spent the last year doing everything herself, and sometimes things fell through the cracks, and usually the consequences were manageable. Today the consequences were not manageable. Her brother Marco was 60 feet away in the nave, unreachable inside the ceremony, walking with a ring on a pillow and the expression he always wore at family events, that particular combination of warmth and mild bewilderment that was the face of a man who loved everyone around him and understood almost none of them. She thought about her cousin Alessio, who had been Rocco's friend before the marriage, who still believed Rocco's version of things, who thought, she was almost certain now, that keeping Rocco informed was a form of loyalty rather than a form of damage. Rocco had known about the wedding, had known about the garden where children gathered while adults adjusted boutonnieres, had stood close enough to her daughter to offer her a coin. Emilia had told her, very quietly, in the second bathroom stall, with the spider nearby. "He said hello to me outside. He tried to give me a coin, but I said I wasn't allowed to take things from strangers." Sofia opened her contacts. Found Luca, her brother's middle name. The name she saved him under on the new phone she'd gotten 3 weeks ago after her cousin had noticed that her location was being pinged from her old device to an app she hadn't downloaded herself. She had transferred contacts in a rush. On a Tuesday night, Emilia asleep on the couch beside her, fingers moving too fast over too small a screen. She hit call. It rang twice. Then a voice answered that she had never heard in her life. Low and precise, and carrying the kind of absolute quiet that came from a man accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any room. Yes. Not hello. Not who is this. Just yes. Like a door opening onto something she should not have knocked on. Sofia went very still. Luca, she whispered, because her brain took 3 full seconds to catch up to what her instincts already knew. A pause. Not long, but calibrated. The pause of someone listening with complete attention. Who is this? The voice said. It was not a question. It was a demand delivered so quietly it barely displaced the air. I'm sorry. She was already pulling the phone from her ear. I have the wrong number. Wait. One word. She stopped moving. She could not have explained later why that single word from a complete stranger made her freeze in a church bathroom stall with her daughter's hand in hers. Something in the delivery of it. Something that was not a request. You called this number, the voice said. That means you dialed it. What did you need? It was a mistake. I was trying to reach my brother. But you didn't. A pause. What did you need from your brother? Sofia looked at Emilia. Her daughter was watching her with those large, steady eyes. That took in everything and judged nothing. She had Rocco's mouth, which was the cruelty of genetics. She had Sofia's eyes, which was the grace of it. There's a man here, Sofia said, because the battery was dying and she was out of options, and sometimes the arithmetic of desperation produced strange math. At my cousin's wedding. He's not supposed to be here. He has a restraining order against him, and he's here anyway. And I have my daughter with me, and I can't. She stopped. I'm sorry. This is insane. I'm sorry for calling. She hung up. For 12 seconds, she counted them. The phone was silent. Then it rang. Emilia looked at it. Mama, your phone is calling itself. Yes, baby. Are you going to answer? Sofia looked at the screen. Unknown. Blocked. The kind of number that appeared on a phone and meant either nothing at all or something so specific and unavoidable it might as well be fate knocking in the only language it knew. She answered. Which church? The voice said. Not how are you? Not are you okay? Not I'm sorry you're in trouble. Which church? The operational question. The one that mattered. You don't have to. Which church? Sofia pressed her back against the tile wall. Emilia had tucked herself against her hip and was watching the spider with absolute calm. Santa Caterina, Sofia said. On the Corso. But I don't even know who you are. You don't need to. A beat. What does he look like? Dark blue suit. Brown hair, going gray at the temples. He'll be near the back of the nave or by the entrance. He doesn't make scenes right away. He waits. Silence on the line. Then, don't leave the building until I tell you to. I don't know who. Stay inside. The voice was still quiet, still carrying that particular gravity that had no good explanation. Don't let him know you've called anyone. I didn't mean to call anyone, Sofia said, and she heard the edge of something in her own voice, 3 parts exhaustion and 1 part the dark humor of a woman who had stopped expecting things to be simple. I know, said the voice. Stay inside anyway. Then he was gone. Sofia stood in the church bathroom for another 4 minutes, holding her daughter's hand, listening to the organ shift into something slower. Outside in the nave, Julia was probably crying. She had factored the crying into the mascara budget. She had prepared for this her whole life. Sofia had also prepared, just for different things. She lifted Emilia off the closed toilet lid so they were eye to eye. Her daughter looked back at her with the gravity of someone who understood that this was a serious moment even if she didn't yet have the vocabulary for what made it serious. We're going back inside now, Sofia said quietly. If a man tries to talk to Mama, I need you to hold my hand and not let go. Can you do that? Yes, Emilia said. Like when we crossed the street. Exactly like that. She smoothed the pearl clip. She straightened the sash. She walked to the mirror and looked at herself, dark hair twisted up because she hadn't had time for anything else. A green dress she had made herself from a pattern 2 years old. Small pearl earrings that matched the clip. Eyes that were too bright and too wide and not going to give her away if she had anything to say about it. She was her mother's daughter. Her mother had grown up in a fishing village in Campania, and had learned early that the sea could be beautiful and merciless at the same time, and that the only useful response to either was to keep working. Sofia Mancini was 28 years old, and she was so tired of being afraid. But she was going to go back into that reception hall anyway because she had not spent 14 months surviving in order to let Rocco Sava dictate whether she could stand at her cousin's wedding. She straightened her spine. She put her phone in her clutch. She opened the bathroom door and walked back into the light. Nicolò Ferrara was, at the moment Sofia Mancini's misdial reached him, sitting in the back of a black car on the Corso Vittorio Emanuele reviewing a contract that would finalize the purchase of 3 warehouses in the Port District. The contract required his signature and his full attention, and neither of these things was in short supply. He had built his capacity for focus the way other men built muscle through sustained, deliberate application of will over 2 decades in a business that rewarded nothing less than total awareness. He answered his phone the way he did everything, without hesitation and without explanation. The number was blocked even to the people who called it. 11 people in the world had it. He answered because someone with that number was calling, and in his experience, calls that came through that line were always worth taking. He had not expected a woman whispering in a bathroom. He had not expected the specific quality of that whisper. Controlled, precise, the voice of someone who had learned that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. He'd heard fear in many registers over the years. The particular register of a woman who was managing it rather than surrendering to it was one he recognized and did not dismiss. He recognized it the way a navigator recognized specific, whether not with emotion, but with the precise cataloging attention of someone who understood that what he was reading would determine what came next. When she hung up the first time, he stared at his phone for approximately 2 seconds. Then he called back. He told himself it was information management. He had a well-documented professional interest in situations that did not announce themselves cleanly. He told himself he wanted to understand the nature of the misdial, whether it was random, whether something operational was in it that he was missing. He did not examine the other reason, the one that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the fact that she had said, "I have my daughter with me," and those words had landed differently than any other words she could have said. When she answered the second time, he gathered everything she gave him quickly and completely. A woman alone with a child. A man with a restraining order who had come anyway. Santa Caterina, on the Corso, 12 minutes from where his car was currently idling. Change of plans, he said to his driver. Sandro didn't ask questions. In 12 years of service, Sandro had learned that questions were for other people. He put the car in gear. Nico's phone buzzed immediately. Dante, his second, one short line. Everything okay? He'd heard the conversation. The car was not a private space. Yes, Nico sent back. You want company? Dante replied. He considered this. A woman in a church bathroom. A man in a blue suit with a restraining order. A child who had been spoken to by someone she didn't know. No, he sent back. Dante responded with a raised eyebrow emoji, which was as close to editorial commentary as Dante ever permitted himself. Nico put the phone away. He had grown up 3 blocks from Santa Caterina, had attended his father's funeral mass there at 16, had knelt in its cold pews, and made the kind of promises that get made to the kind of God who does not answer clearly. He hadn't been back since. He did not examine that either. He simply watched the Corso slide past and calculated what a man in a dark blue suit waiting in the back of a church would do when he saw something unexpected walk through the door. Pull up on the Via della Rosa, he said. Not the front. The car eased around the corner and stopped. Nico stepped out. The summer air was warm and thick with the smell of the city diesel and citrus and old stone, and the church's side entrance was visible 30 meters ahead, the wooden door standing slightly ajar. From somewhere inside, the music had shifted into something slower, the particular quiet that followed ceremony. Not silence. The held breath of a gathering about to exhale into celebration. The reception, then. The timing was different than he'd anticipated. He adjusted. He walked through the side door. Sofia had made it back to the Corsi family table without incident. Giulia's reception was being held in the church's attached hall, vaulted ceilings, long tables and white towers of flowers her aunt had been planning for 6 months with the intensity of someone preparing for a military campaign. The room was full of people doing what people did at weddings. Eating too much, crying a little, talking loudly about things that mattered less than they thought. Emilia sat beside her eating a bread roll, and examining a flower she had extracted from the centerpiece with surgical precision. Rocco was at the back of the room. He hadn't approached. He wouldn't. Not yet. Not here. That wasn't how Rocco operated. Rocco operated through the slow tightening of a situation, the way you drew a net, no single move that announced itself, just a gradual reduction of space until there was nowhere left to go. She'd lived that particular geometry for 4 years of marriage, and she knew every measurement of it. He would come to the table when he was ready, when he had established, through his simple continued presence, that he could be anywhere at any time, that restraining orders were pieces of paper, and that she was fundamentally unable to keep him out of her life. That was the message. That was always the message. Her Aunt Elena materialized at her shoulder. Sofia, Cara, you have to move to the head table for the photographs. Julia is asking, in a moment, Sofia said. But she's in a moment, Elena. Her aunt retreated, giving her the look she always gave her, the particular combination of worry and frustration that had replaced genuine engagement somewhere in the last 2 years. No one in the family entirely knew what to do with her since the divorce. They'd stopped asking direct questions. They'd started asking around her instead, filling conversations with everything except the thing they were all thinking. Sofia had learned to inhabit the space of that avoidance. She knew its shape the way you knew the shape of a room you'd spent years navigating in the dark. Emilia looked up from her flower. Mama, that man is still there. I know, baby. He's looking at us. I know. Should we wave? No. Sofia touched her daughter's hair. Keep eating your bread, sweetheart. The door at the far end of the hall opened. It was a service entrance, the kind that led back through the church's side passages, the kind that wedding guests didn't use. Sofia was watching because she had positioned herself facing the room's exits. Another habit she had acquired without noticing, the way you acquired all the habits of vigilance, gradually, necessarily, until they became indistinguishable from instinct. She saw the door swing inward, and she saw the man who came through it, and she felt something happen in her chest that had no name she was ready to assign. He was tall, not dramatically so, but in the way that made a room reorganize itself slightly. He wore a dark jacket over a white shirt, no tie, and he moved through the doorway the way people moved when they had never in their lives had to account for the space they occupied. Not aggressive, not showy, just absolute. The particular physical fact of a man who had never been in a room where his presence was not the primary fact of the room. His eyes moved across the gathering with the practiced efficiency of someone cataloging threats. When they reached Sofia, they stopped. Not because she was the only person looking. The whole near side of the hall was watching him. Strangers at weddings always attracted attention. They stopped because he made them stop, and he made them stop because he was looking at her with the specific attention of someone who had already made a decision. Nicolò Ferrara crossed the reception hall of Santa Caterina the way he crossed every room in his life, like he'd always been there. And if you thought otherwise, the problem was yours. He didn't look at Rocco Sava on his way past. He didn't acknowledge the man's existence by so much as a glance. He walked past him and kept his trajectory fixed and arrived at Sofia's table and stopped. Up close, he was different from the voice. The voice had been grave and controlled and impossibly certain. The man was all of those things, yes, but he was also watching her with something in his eyes that was not entirely cold. Something that registered her specific reality: the table, the bread roll, the small girl with the flower, the slight stiffness in Sofia's posture that was the result of 4 years of marriage and 14 months of afterward, and took in all of it without looking away. Sofia Mancini, he said. Not a question. He had found her name in the 12 minutes between her call and his arrival. Yes, she said. Because what else was there? I'm Nico. He didn't offer a last name. She didn't ask for one. Some introductions were complete in their simplest form. Emilia looked up from her flower. She studied the man with 4-year-old directness, the unguarded assessment of someone who had not yet learned to perform indifference. Are you Mama's friend? I'm working on it, Nico said. Something in his voice shifted slightly when he addressed the child, not softer exactly, but more careful. The way people's voices changed when they were trying not to frighten something small. Emilia considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Okay, she said, and went back to the flower. He's at the back of the room, Sofia said quietly. She kept her eyes on this man she'd never seen before and tried to find the calculus that would tell her whether she had made things better or dramatically worse. I know where he is, Nico said. What are you going to do? He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, not impatient, not dismissive. The expression of a person weighing the precise distance between what she'd asked and what she needed to understand. Do you want specifics, he said, or do you want results? She thought about that. She thought about 14 months of restraining orders and police reports and lawyers who looked at her with careful compassion and told her the system would protect her, and then watched with that same careful compassion as it demonstrably failed to. She thought about Emilia in the garden, a coin extended in Rocco's palm. Results, she said. He nodded once. He straightened. And then he turned and walked back across the room toward Rocco Sava. Sofia had expected many things from the next 30 seconds. Raised voices, maybe. A scene, which was both Rocco's weapon and his vulnerability. The visible proof that he could not be ignored, that he existed in the world and she was required to account for that existence. She had expected her uncle to look over, her aunt to clutch someone's arm, Julia's new mother-in-law to begin quietly reconsidering the venue. What she had not expected was how quiet it was. Nico approached Rocco from the left, not the front. The angle of it meant Rocco had to turn slightly to face him, which already put him at a disadvantage he probably didn't consciously register, but his body did. Nico stopped at a distance that was not close enough to be confrontational, but was somehow still too close, the distance of someone who had not acknowledged that ordinary social geometries applied to him. He spoke. Sofia couldn't hear the words from across the room. She watched Rocco's face instead. Rocco's face did something she had never once seen it do in 4 years of marriage and 14 months of everything after. It went uncertain. Not afraid. Not yet. Just uncertain. The expression of a man who had walked into a room knowing the weight of every person in it and had discovered, mid-room, that he had been wrong about one of them, that the weight actually belonged somewhere else entirely. Nico spoke again. Still quiet. Still completely without theater. Rocco's jaw moved. Nico waited. Rocco moved toward the exit. He didn't run. That wasn't in his nature, and Sofia knew it. He would have calculated the exit as strategy, as a position to return from, as a withdrawal that cost him nothing because he already had what he came for, her knowledge that he could come. But he walked out. Through the main hall doors, past the guests who'd watched his approach and subsequent retreat with the fascination of people observing weather, and out into the corridor. The doors closed behind him. Nico stood there for a moment with his back to her. Then he turned and came back to the table. Sofia was aware that she was shaking. Not visibly. She'd gotten very good at invisible shaking, but in the way where everything a few degrees below her skin was vibrating slightly, and her hands needed to be kept very still, or it would surface. He's gone, Nico said. For now, she said. He looked at her. Yes, for now. She appreciated that. She did. The people in her life who loved her said things like, "It'll be fine," and "He won't bother you again," and "It's over." Those things were kindness, but they were not truth, and Sofia had lived too long in the gap between the two to find kindness without truth very comforting anymore. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "That you were no longer available." Those exact words. More or less. Emilia had finished the bread roll and was now looking between her mother and the tall stranger with the expression of someone following a conversation in a language she was still learning. "Mama," she said, "can I have more bread?" Sofia looked at her daughter. Then she looked at the man who had come to a stranger's wedding because a woman he'd never met had dialed one wrong number and whispered into the void, and he had decided for reasons Sofia could not yet understand that the void owed her a response. She thought about the 14 months since the divorce. About the restraining order. About the apartment she moved to twice. About the new phone with its hurriedly transferred contacts. About a coin extended toward her daughter in a church garden. "Yes, baby," she said. "I'll get you more bread." She started to rise. Nico moved first, a small gesture, fractional, but she noticed it. His hand moved toward the bread basket on the adjacent table and placed it within Emilia's reach before Sofia had fully stood. It was such a small thing. It was such a particular kind of small thing. The kind of attention that required no announcement. "Sit," he said, quietly. "You're still shaking." Sofia sat. She hadn't thought it showed. "I'm fine." "You're fine," he agreed, in a tone that made clear he understood the difference between fine and fine. "But sit anyway." Emilia took a piece of bread from the basket with great ceremony and resumed her examination of the flower, pressing a petal carefully back toward the stem. At the head table, Julia was laughing at something her new husband had said, and the photographer was circling them like a satellite, and the cake was being cut into portions that would be wrapped and forgotten in their freezers, and the reception was proceeding with the oblivious momentum of celebration. Nobody had seen what had just happened, or if they had, they'd decided not to examine it. The Corsi family had a long tradition of not examining things that would require confrontation. "I don't understand why you came," Sofia said. She kept her voice low. "You don't know me." "No." "Then why?" Nico was quiet for a moment. He was looking at Emilia, not the way adults sometimes looked at children, with performed interest but with genuine attention. Like Emilia was a piece of information he was still processing. "You said you had your daughter with you," he said finally. Sofia waited. "That's why." It was a complete sentence. The whole explanation. He had heard a woman say, "I have my daughter with me," in a voice that meant the daughter made everything more impossible, and that had been sufficient. Sofia didn't know what to do with that. It didn't fit any architecture she had for understanding why people did things. Rocco had always done things for reasons she could track: control, vanity, the need to demonstrate ownership. The men she'd borrowed money from to start the alterations business had done things for interest rates and return timelines. Even the lawyer who'd helped her had done things because it was her job. This man had come to a church because there was a child. "He'll come back," she said. "Rocco. Not today, probably, but he will. What you said to him, whatever name you gave him, that buys time. It doesn't end it." "I know. He has someone in my family. Someone who told him about the wedding. He knew about the garden." Something shifted in Nico's expression. A slight recalibration, the way a lens adjusted when what it was looking at came into sharper focus. "Who?" he said. "I don't know for certain. But you suspect." "Yes." His phone buzzed in his jacket. He looked at it briefly and put it away. His attention came back to her. "Where are you staying tonight?" "My apartment." She caught the slight change in his expression and preempted what he was about to say. "It's what I have." "Is it secure?" She thought about the deadbolt she had installed herself after 3 YouTube tutorials. She thought about the window that faced the alley and the neighbors on either side who worked nights and the landlord who would not hear it if something happened. "It's what I have," she said again. "You can't go back there tonight." "I don't know you." "No," he agreed, in the tone he used for accurate things. He was not pretending the objection was unreasonable. He was simply waiting on the other side of it. "You don't. But you called me." "By accident." "Yes." He looked at her. "And here we are. Here we are." Sofia looked at her daughter, who had eaten the bread and was now attempting to reattach petals to the stem with absolute concentration, her tongue pressed to the corner of her lip. The hall was warm around them with the sound of family. Her cousin was happy. The photographer was capturing it. The city outside was doing what the city always did, going on, indifferent and alive and entirely uninterested in the particular weight of Sofia Mancini's situation. Her phone had 4% battery. Rocco Sava was somewhere outside with information he shouldn't have and the absolute certainty that she had no ceiling high enough to protect herself. And there was this man, this stranger who had come because she'd said the words, "My daughter with me." "I have nowhere to go," Sofia said. She said it quietly and without performance. It was simply the arithmetic of the situation, spoken aloud. "Yes, you do." Nico said it the same way. No flourish. No persuasion. Just the flat fact of it. "My car is on the Via della Rosa. When you're ready, we leave from the side entrance." "And go where?" "Somewhere he can't find you tonight." "You understand I need more than that." "I know." Something in his expression, not quite a softening, but a recognition. "You'll know exactly where you are and exactly who I am before we arrive. I'll tell you everything you need to know." "Why would you do that?" He looked at her directly. He had very dark eyes, the kind that were accustomed to looking at things straight on. "Because you asked me a direct question," he said. "And because you deserve a direct answer. Both of those things are rarer than they should be." Sofia held his gaze. This was the moment. She felt it arriving the way you felt whether coming a change in pressure, something cellular and certain. She thought about the year she'd spent choosing the safe small option every single time. The apartment above the dry cleaners. The clients who paid late, and she said nothing. The family events she almost didn't attend because Rocco might be there, and then attended anyway because she refused to let him take those too. She had made one reckless choice in the last 14 months. She had answered a wrong number callback at 4% battery in a church bathroom, and a stranger had walked through a service door and sent her ex-husband walking without raising his voice. "Emilia," she said. Her daughter looked up. "Can you hold Mama's hand? We're going to say goodbye to Julia, and then we're going to go with." She glanced at him. "Nico." "Who's Nico?" Emilia asked. "A new friend," Sofia said. Emilia studied him with the frank assessment of someone who had been 4 years old for long enough to develop standards. "Do you have any pets?" she asked. Something moved across Nico Ferrara's face, quick, almost invisible, the passage of something that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "No," he said, "but there's a cat in the building where we're going." Emilia's eyes went wide. She looked at her mother with an expression that made the entire arithmetic of the evening irrelevant. "Mama," she said, "there's a cat." Sofia looked at this man, this dangerous, impossible, certain stranger, and felt the last of her resistance settle quietly somewhere she would examine later, when she had the space for it. "There's apparently a cat," she said. "There is," he confirmed. "Then I suppose we should go." They said goodbye to Julia at the head table. Sofia kept it brief and embrace, a whispered "I love you," something about a headache, and Emilia needing an early night. Julia looked at her with the attention of someone who knew her too well and nodded without asking questions, which was the most loving thing anyone had done for Sofia all day. Her aunt tried to intercept them at the door. Sofia said, "I'll call tomorrow, I promise," and kept walking. She didn't look back. They walked through the side corridor of Santa Caterina, the three of them, the woman and the child, and the man who had answered the phone. The candlelight from the small devotional alcove near the exit threw gold across the old stone floor. The organ had started again somewhere in the distance, something slower and sweeter than before, the kind of music that belonged to the end of ceremonies when the ceremony itself had already changed everything. Emilia walked between them, holding her reconstructed flower in one hand. Her other hand, without particular ceremony, reached up and found Nico's. He looked down at her. He didn't pull away. He walked with the child holding 2 fingers of his hand through the candlelit corridor of a church where his father had been buried and a stranger had called him by accident, and everything had already, irrevocably, begun to change. At the side door he pushed it open. The summer night came in warm, diesel, citrus, old stone, and Sofia walked through it into the space that came after decisions. The Via della Rosa was 20 meters ahead. A black car was parked near the wall, quiet and present as a fact. She stopped just outside the door. Emilia was looking up at the sky with the expression of someone cataloging stars. "Tell me your last name," Sofia said. He looked at her. "Ferrara." She knew the name. She knew it the way everyone in this city knew it, not from personal acquaintance, not from any specific story, but from the particular quality of silence that surrounded it when it came up in conversation. The way people's voices adjusted their register when someone said the Ferrara family. The way her brother had once used it as shorthand for a level of power that was simply outside the map of regular life. She looked at this man. She thought about the 13 minutes between her call and his arrival. She thought about Rocco's face going uncertain for the first time in 4 years. She thought about Emilia's hand in his in the candlelit corridor. "All right," Sofia said. "Tell me where we're going." He opened the car door. "Somewhere safe," he said. She believed him. She could not entirely have said why. Standing there on the Via della Rosa with the summer city breathing around her and her daughter pressing close to her side. But she believed him the way you believed certain things, not through reasoning, but through the specific quality of recognition that comes when something true presents itself in a form you haven't encountered before. She got in the car. The car moved through the city like water through stone channels, finding the path of least resistance through the late evening traffic. Sandro drove without being told the destination, which meant Nico had already communicated it through some means Sofia hadn't observed. Emilia fell asleep within 3 minutes. This was her superpower and her greatest gift, the ability to be fully and trustingly asleep in any situation her body found comfortable, regardless of what her brain might have said if consulted. She curled against Sofia's side with her cheek pressed to the green dress and her flower loosely gripped in one hand, and her breathing already deep and even. Sofia watched the city go past and tried to organize the information she had. Nico sat beside her, not close, not deliberately distant, just there, occupying his side of the car with the same certainty he occupied every space. He had his phone out but wasn't looking at it. and she had the sense he was waiting in the way of someone who had decided to let a situation develop at the pace it required. "You said you'd tell me who you are," she said. "I said I'd tell you everything you needed to know. Is there a difference?" He looked at her. "Yes. What I am is complicated. What you need to know right now is simpler." He put the phone away. "I run businesses in this city. Some of them legitimate. Some of them not entirely." He paused with the precision of someone who had spent years choosing exactly how much to say. "I have resources and I have reach. When I tell you he won't find you tonight, I mean it the way I mean everything. Completely. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we talk about what comes after tonight. The apartment you mentioned. 4 floors up, 2 exits, full security coverage. No one enters without my people knowing." He looked at the street ahead. "My housekeeper, Rosaria, will be there. She's been with my family for 23 years. She won't ask you questions you don't want to answer." "I don't even know what questions I don't want to answer yet." "Then she'll wait." Sofia looked at him. In the moving light of the city streets, he had the look of someone assembled from a very old tradition, the kind of face that Italian painters had been attempting for 400 years. Strong jaw, dark eyes, something in the set of his brow that was neither unkind nor gentle, but simply present. There, attending to reality rather than performing his attention to it. She had been married to a man who performed everything, who constructed each gesture with an audience in mind. And the exhaustion of that had built so slowly she hadn't recognized it as exhaustion until the year after she'd left, when she had begun to sleep properly for the first time. "He's going to come back," she said. "Rocco, whatever you said to him tonight, whatever your name means to him, it buys time. It doesn't end it. He doesn't stop. I know. You said you'd deal with the person in my family, the one who told him about the wedding." "I will." "What does that mean exactly?" "Deal with it." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city thinned slightly, streets growing quieter and wider. "It means they'll understand," he said carefully, "that what they've been doing has consequences, and that the consequences have changed. Not violence." "Not violence," he confirmed. "Information delivered clearly. Some people only understand the language of consequence. That doesn't require blood." Sofia thought about her cousin Alessio, who had been Rocco's friend first, who still believed Rocco's version of the marriage the way people believed the first version of things they were told before they had reason to question it, who thought, she was almost certain, that keeping Rocco informed was a form of loyalty to a friendship rather than a form of damage to a family. That was the logic of a man who had never had to live inside the consequences of information. "My marriage lasted 4 years," she said. She hadn't decided to say this. It came out the way things came out when the pressure had been building long enough that words arrived before intention. "I left when Emilia was 3. He didn't hit her, I want to say that clearly, because it's the first thing people ask. He never touched her. He understood that was a line." She paused. "I think the line held because crossing it would have made him look bad in front of people he cared about impressing. Not because of Emilia herself. Not because of the child herself," Nico said. "No." She looked at her daughter's sleeping face. "The pearl clip. The flower. Not because of her." He was quiet. He was very good at quiet, the kind that was not empty, that was actively present, attending to what was being said without rushing to fill the space after it. "I have 17 clients," she continued. "I make alterations. Wedding dresses, mostly. Some formal wear. I work from the apartment, which means I can keep Emilia with me. I make enough. Not comfortably, but enough." She smoothed her dress over her knees. "He found my address 6 months after I left. I moved. He found the new address 4 months after that. I moved again. The current apartment has been safe for 8 months." She paused. "Had been." Nico said nothing. He was listening with his whole body, the way certain people listened, not waiting for their turn to speak, but actually taking in what she was giving him. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me," Sofia said. "I know. I'm telling you because if you're going to do something about this situation, you should understand what the situation actually is. Not the version that makes me look like I need rescuing. The actual version." "The actual version," he repeated quietly, "is that you've been protecting yourself and your daughter for 14 months under conditions that would have broken most people. You've done it without adequate resources, without reliable support, and while running a business that keeps you both alive." He turned to look at her directly. "That's not a person who needs rescuing. That's a person who needs someone in her corner who has the specific capabilities she doesn't." Sofia looked at him. Outside, the city had changed entirely quieter now, the streets lined with trees that filtered the streetlight into moving patterns on the pavement. Old buildings with deep doorways and the particular privacy of neighborhoods that had been expensive long enough to learn how to hold their silence. The car slowed. Stopped. They had arrived at a building that was unremarkable from the outside: old stone, for floors, iron balconies, two potted trees flanking the entrance that had been there long enough to become fixtures rather than decoration. The door was already open. A woman in her late 50s stood in the entrance, compact and silver-haired, with the expression of someone who had been expecting them and had opinions about the hour but was keeping them to herself. Rosaria, Sofia assumed. She was right. The apartment was on the third floor. Clean, spare, unexpectedly warm high ceilings, windows overlooking the quiet street below, a kitchen that smelled of something savory, kept warm on the stove. Rosaria took Emilia from Sofia's arms without being asked and without waking her, an expertise born of long practice, and carried her to the smaller bedroom, arranging her on the bed with the careful efficiency of someone who understood the sacred nature of not disturbing sleep that was genuinely peaceful. When she came back to the main room, Sofia was standing by the window looking down at the street, arms folded loosely over her chest, watching the quiet below the way she always watched from windows, taking inventory, measuring exits. Nico was on the phone near the hallway, his voice very low. "There's soup," Rosaria said to Sofia. "And bread. You haven't eaten." She hadn't, actually. She'd had half a piece of wedding cake, standing up, watching the doors. "Thank you," she said. "Sit." It wasn't unkind. It was just practical. The tone of a woman who had spent decades making sure the people in her orbit had what they needed because she'd long since accepted that most of them wouldn't ask for it. Sofia sat at the kitchen table. Rosaria put soup in front of her. Bread. A glass of water. Then she disappeared into the back of the apartment with the discretion of someone who understood when presence was the opposite of comfort. Nico came in from the hallway. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. "Eat," he said. "I was already going to." "Good." He poured 2 small glasses of wine from a bottle already open on the counter, unremarkable label, the kind of wine someone bought because they were going to drink it rather than display it. He set one in front of her. He took the other and stood by the counter. They were quiet. Sofia ate the soup. It was good, vegetables, something with lemon, the kind of simple preparation that announced itself through quality rather than complexity. She ate slowly, and with each spoonful, something in her chest that had been clenched since she first saw Rocco in the back of that nave loosened, fractionally, the way cold things loosened in warmth. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know." "Then, eat the soup." She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so entirely specific and present and free of any calculation she could identify. "Eat the soup." He said it the way he said everything, like it was the only logical next thing to say, and he had simply said it. She ate the soup. When she finished, she looked at him across the kitchen. This stranger who was not entirely a stranger anymore, but was not yet anything she had a name for. "Tomorrow," she said. "What happens tomorrow?" He turned the wine glass in his hand. "Once. A slow rotation. Tomorrow I find out who Rocco Sava actually is," he said. "What he's connected to, who he knows, what he has and what he doesn't have. And then we talk about what comes next. What if what he has is more than you expect? Then I'll manage my expectations accordingly. You're not worried?" "No. You should probably tell me if you're performing that." Something shifted in his face again, that quick movement in the direction of something that wasn't quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. "I'm not performing it," he said. "In 20 years of managing problems that most people would find significant, Rocco Sava is not the most formidable thing I've encountered. He's very certain of himself. So was everyone before they met me." It was said without vanity, without theater. Just the plain statement of a man who had learned his own weight through experience rather than assumption. Sofia looked at him for a long moment in the kitchen of this apartment that was not hers, with her daughter sleeping down the hall, with the wedding reception still probably going at Santa Caterina, and her cousin dancing to the kind of music that belonged to beginnings. "There's actually a cat," she said. "You told her there was a cat." "Third floor, across the hall. Orange. His name is Bep." A pause. "He belongs to the woman who lives there. She's 81, and she lets him sit outside her door in the evening. Emilia will see him tomorrow." Sofia looked at this man who had come to a church because she'd said the words "my daughter" with me, who had walked past Rocco Sava without looking at him and said something in 20 seconds that 4 years of marriage had never produced, who had told her daughter there was a cat as if that mattered, as if the specific comfort of a 4-year-old was a detail worth attending to, who was standing in a kitchen at midnight holding a glass of ordinary wine and telling her to eat the soup. "Thank you," she said. She said it simply, because everything else she could say was too large or too complicated or would require knowing exactly what she felt. And right now all she felt was that she had called a wrong number and ended up here, and Emilia would see the cat tomorrow, and that was something. That was, in the arithmetic of the last 14 months, an enormous amount. "You're welcome," said Nico Ferrara. He said it like he meant it. The way people said things when they knew the difference between courtesy and truth. Outside, somewhere across the narrow street, a window opened and the sound of someone else's music drifted in something old, something her grandmother would have known the words to. The city breathed around them, complicated and indifferent and full of the particular beauty of places that had survived themselves. Sofia looked at her hands. Tomorrow would bring its own architecture, its own demands. Rocco was somewhere in the city with his blue suit and his certainty, and there were questions she hadn't asked yet, and answers she wasn't ready for, and the full weight of whatever it meant that she was sitting in Nicolò Ferrara's apartment at midnight, safe, while her daughter slept down the hall. But tonight there was soup and bread and a glass of wine, and a man who had come because there was a child. Tonight there was a ceiling, the first real one she'd had in 14 months. Sometimes the arithmetic of desperation produced results that were not what you expected. Sometimes recklessness was just another word for the courage of having no remaining options. Sofia Mancini finished her wine and sat at a stranger's kitchen table in the warm circle of lamplight, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, something that was not the opposite of peace. Sofia woke before Emilia, which was unusual. Normally her daughter surfaced like a small, determined submarine, eyes open, opinions formed, ready to negotiate the terms of breakfast before Sofia had finished her first breath of consciousness. But this morning the apartment was quiet, and the light coming through the unfamiliar curtains was the particular gold of a city summer morning. And for exactly 3 seconds Sofia lay in the strange bed and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Safe. She felt safe. Then she remembered where she was and why, and the 3 seconds ended. She lay still for another moment, cataloging the room. White walls. A window facing east, the curtains thin enough to let in the light, but dense enough for privacy. A wardrobe in pale wood. A chair in the corner where someone, Rosaria, she assumed, had left a folded set of clothes. A soft dark blouse. Trousers in a neutral gray. Things that were not her size exactly, but close enough. Things that spoke of a household practiced in the quiet logistics of providing for people who arrived without luggage. On the small table beside the bed, a glass of water and her phone, fully charged. She looked at the charge for a long moment. She had not asked anyone to charge it. Someone had done it anyway. She got up. She went first to the smaller bedroom and stood in the doorway watching Emilia breathe. Her daughter was still deeply asleep, one arm thrown over her head, the pearl clip still somehow in her hair, the flower, the reconstructed, petal-pressed flower from the Corsi wedding centerpiece, placed carefully on the nightstand as though it were an object of value. Which, to Emilia, it was. Sofia watched her daughter sleep for a full minute. It was the particular kind of watching that parents did when they thought no one was looking, thorough and unguarded and containing everything that couldn't be said aloud without dissolving into it. Then she went to find the kitchen. Rosaria was already there. Coffee was already made. There was bread on a board and fruit in a bowl, and the particular organized efficiency of a woman who understood that the best service was the kind that appeared before it was requested. "Sit," Rosaria said, without looking up from the stove. Sofia sat. The coffee was very good. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked out the window at the morning street below, the trees, the old stone buildings, a woman walking a small dog with the self-contained purpose of someone who had somewhere specific to be. The city doing what it always did. Going on. "He left at 4 this morning," Rosaria said. "He'll be back." "He was here until 4? He was working." Rosaria set a plate in front of her, eggs, bread, the kind of breakfast that required neither elaborate gratitude nor explanation. "He works when something requires his attention." "You required his attention." So he worked. Sofia thought about the man sitting in this kitchen at 4 in the morning while she and Emilia slept down the hall, working whatever it was that Nicolò Ferrara worked at 4 in the morning. What was he doing? Rosaria looked at her directly for the first time. She had sharp eyes, the kind that had developed their sharpness through years of observing things that required discretion. Finding out about your problem, she said simply, so that he could address it. Sofia held the coffee cup. He didn't have to do that. No. Rosaria turned back to the stove. He didn't. A small sound from the hallway announced Emilia's arrival approximately 40 seconds before Emilia herself appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had slept in her dress because there had been nothing else, and her curls were dramatically disheveled, and she was carrying the flower from the nightstand with both hands as though transporting something ceremonial. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the kitchen and at Rosaria and at the window and at the fruit bowl with the sequential assessment of someone taking inventory. "Good morning," said Rosaria, in the specific tone of a woman who liked children and did not feel the need to perform that liking in an exaggerated register. "Good morning," Emilia said. "I'm hungry." A pause. "Please," she added, because Sofia's eyes had moved to her. "Sit down," Rosaria said. "There's bread." Emilia sat beside her mother and began eating the bread with the focused efficiency of someone who had important business to attend to afterward. 3 bites in, she looked up. "Is the cat outside yet?" Rosaria glanced at the clock on the wall. "Bep usually comes out around 9. It's 8:30. Emilia absorbed this information with serious attention. "I'll wait," she decided, and resumed her bread. Sofia looked at her daughter and then at the window, and then at the street below, and felt the arithmetic of the situation assembling itself around her with the particular clarity that came from a good night's sleep and strong coffee, and the brief mercy of a morning where nothing was yet required of her. She had 17 clients. She had a wedding dress due in 8 days of full alteration, bodice taken in, hem let out, a considerable piece of work. She had the fabric on her work table at the apartment she could not currently go back to. She had her sewing machine, her notions kit, her marking chalk and her pins, and all the small specific tools of her trade that she had accumulated over 6 years of building a business with her own hands out of nothing more than a skill she'd learned from her mother and a stubbornness about making rent. She had, on the other hand, her daughter, asleep for the first time in months without a single sound. She had a full charge on her phone. She had eggs and bread and very good coffee and an orange cat, who came out at 9 o'clock. She looked at the pearl clip in Emilia's hair. She thought about what came next. At 10 minutes past 9, a knock came at the apartment door. Rosaria opened it. Nico stood in the hallway in a jacket different from the one he'd worn last night, which meant he had either gone home or kept a change of clothes elsewhere, and Sofia did not ask which. Behind him, at the far end of the corridor, an orange shape was sitting in the sunlight from the window at the end of the hall with its tail curled around its feet, and its eyes closed in supreme indifference to everything. Emilia, who had been watching the door since 9 o'clock precisely, saw the cat before she saw the man. She made a sound that had no alphabetic equivalent and looked at her mother with eyes that contained a question so urgent it transcended language. "Ask Rosaria," Sofia said. "Can I?" Emilia said to Rosaria. "His name is Bep," Rosaria said. "He belongs to Signora Greco across the hall. You may look at him, but you mustn't chase him." Emilia was already in the hallway, moving with the careful, suppressed energy of a child who had been told not to run and was obeying the letter of that instruction while absolutely violating its spirit. Nico stepped aside to let her pass. He watched her go with an expression that was not a smile, but was in the process of deciding whether to be one. "She's fast," he said. "She's always fast," Sofia said. "Come in." He came into the kitchen. Rosaria poured coffee without being asked. He took the cup and stood. He always stood. She was noticing, unless there was a reason to sit, as though the furniture of rooms was available to him but did not require his participation. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Yes." The truth of it was still slightly surprising. "Better than I have in months." "Did you?" "Some." He set down the cup. "I need to tell you what I found." Sofia straightened in her chair. Rosaria, without a word, moved to the hallway to keep a quiet eye on Emilia and the cat. The kitchen was suddenly just the two of them and the morning light and whatever was about to be said. "Rocco Sava runs a contracting company," Nico began. "Legitimate on paper. Renovation work, commercial fit-outs, some residential development. He has 12 employees and a reasonable turnover and a client list that holds up to initial scrutiny. He paused. It doesn't hold up past initial scrutiny. I know the company is dirty, Sofia said. I knew when we were still married. He kept that part of his life very separated from me, but I knew. I just didn't have specifics. The specifics are that he processes money for a man named Vitaly mid-level, not connected to anything significant, but with enough reach to make Rocco feel protected. That protection is what makes him bold. Nico's voice was flat, informational. He believes the connection means he can do things without consequence. It's given him a confidence that outpaces his actual standing. How dangerous is that for us? Vitaly is not a problem. The moment Vitaly understands who you're connected to now, he'll instruct Rocco to leave you alone. Men like Vitaly don't invite trouble from people like me over a personal matter belonging to one of their money processors. He looked at her directly. Rocco knows this, which is why what he did last night is interesting. What do you mean? He came to that wedding after I spoke to him at the reception. Before I arrived, he came because he thought the risk was manageable. After I spoke to him and he left, he stood on the street outside for 40 minutes. He let that land. He didn't go home. He stood outside the church for 40 minutes thinking through his options. The cold that moved through Sofia had nothing to do with the morning air. He's not going to stop. Not voluntarily. No, because it's not about you, she said, understanding it as she said it. It's not about your name or your reach or what he should be afraid of. It's about me. About the fact that I exist somewhere he's not controlling. That's the thing he can't tolerate. Not the obstacle, the existence. Nico looked at her. Something moved in his expression, a recognition, precise and without sentiment. Yes, he said. That's exactly what it is. Sofia looked at the table. My cousin Alessio. I've dealt with that. Already. I said I would. He picked up the coffee cup again. Alessio Corsi will not share information about your whereabouts with anyone going forward. He understands the nature of what he was facilitating and the nature of what the alternative looks like. Did you frighten him? Considerably. No apology in it. No pleasure either. Just the plain fact, delivered honestly. He's not a bad person. He made choices without understanding their full consequences. He understands them now. Sofia thought about Alessio, 3 years older than her, always at the edges of things, always wanting to be part of something he found impressive, always substituting loyalty to concepts for loyalty to people. He had told Rocco about the wedding because he still, in some fundamental way, believed that Rocco's version of the marriage was truer than Sofia's. Because it was easier to believe that than to reckon with what it meant that he'd helped someone hurt his own family. He'll call my mother, she said. He'll say I've gotten myself involved with someone dangerous and the family needs to know. He might. Nico's tone was untroubled. And if your family asks you directly, you'll tell them whatever you decide to tell them. That's your decision, not mine. He set down the cup. But he won't give your location to Rocco again. I'm certain of that. Sofia folded her hands on the table. Outside in the hallway, she could hear Emilia's voice, a running narrative directed at the cat, a combination of questions and observations, and one very clear instruction that the cat appeared to be ignoring. Rosaria's lower murmur underneath, patient and warm. I need to get to my apartment, Sofia said. My work materials. I have a dress due in 8 days and the fabric is on my table. Tell me what you need. I'll have someone get it. I need to go myself. I know where everything is, and I don't want someone going through my workroom. He looked at her. Not today. Nico, not today, he said again, and the repetition was not impatient, just final. I need 24 hours to close something with Vitaly. Once that conversation happens, going to your apartment carries a different level of risk than it does right now. Today, you stay here. Sofia wanted to argue. She could feel the resistance in her chest, the familiar, necessary resistance of a woman who had learned the hard way that allowing someone else to make her decisions was its own kind of danger. But she also knew the difference between someone making decisions to control her and someone making decisions to protect her. She had spent 4 years in the first situation. This was not that. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. And I come with you when you go. He studied her for a moment. Yes. Don't look surprised. It's my apartment. I'm not surprised. He almost smiled. She was learning the geography of his face enough to see where the smiles lived, just below the surface, neither suppressed nor offered freely, simply present when they arrived. I'm recalibrating. You negotiate quickly. I've been practicing, she said, for about 14 months. He nodded, something in his expression settling into a kind of quiet regard. Then he looked toward the hallway where Emilia's voice was still auditing the cat's life choices. I have to go, he said. I'll be back this afternoon. Rosaria has everything you need. If you think of something else, she has a way to reach me. A way to reach you, Sofia repeated. Not your number. My number goes to one phone, he said, which you've already called. Something about the way he said it, the plain acknowledgement of the fact, the absence of any irony in it, made her look up. He was looking at her with the same directness he'd brought to everything, and she held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, long enough to feel the slight shift in the air between them that meant something was being registered that neither of them had named yet. This afternoon, she said. This afternoon. He turned toward the door. Then, almost as an afterthought, though she suspected Nico Ferrara made very few actual afterthoughts, he stopped. The client whose dress is due in 8 days. If you give Rosaria the details, she can have everything from your workroom brought here without anyone entering the apartment. It's your call, but the offer stands. He left. Sofia sat at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee and thought about what it meant that he had anticipated the compromise before she'd finished calculating it herself. The morning unfolded with a surprising quietness. Emilia spent 45 minutes in the hallway making the acquaintance of Bep, who turned out to be enormously tolerant of 4-year-old attention in the way of cats, who had been chosen by an 81-year-old woman, and therefore understood that humans came in a variety of sizes and approaches, and all of them were fundamentally negotiable. Signora Greco, Bep's person, emerged from her apartment at 10:30, registered Emilia's presence with the serene acceptance of someone who had been watching the world long enough that very little surprised her, and invited them both in for a biscuit. Sofia sat in Signora Greco's small sitting room crowded with photographs and plants and the beautiful accumulated clutter of a long life, and watched her daughter eat a biscuit and conduct a formal interview with the cat, and felt something she recognized as ordinary life. Something she had almost forgotten felt like this. Not the absence of fear, exactly, but fear made small enough by the presence of other things that it could be held in one hand instead of taking up every room. You're staying across the hall? Signora Greco asked. She had the directness of the very old, the freedom from social performance that came from having outlasted most reasons for it. For now, Sofia said. Nico brought you. Yes. The old woman looked at her with eyes that had clearly spent decades observing the comings and goings of this building and the man across the hall. He doesn't usually bring people here, she said. He keeps this place separate. Separate from what? From everything else. A pause. He bought me my hearing aids, you know? 3 years ago when mine stopped working and the new ones cost more than I had. He left the box outside my door with a note that said they were from the building management fund. There is no building management fund. She looked at Emilia, who was explaining something important to Bep about the structural integrity of her flower. He pretends not to be kind. He's very practiced at it. Sofia looked at the old woman. Why are you telling me this? Because you look like someone making calculations, Signora Greco said simply. And I thought the calculation should have all the relevant variables. Sofia was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the window, she could hear the city doing its late morning things, traffic, a vendor calling something, a child's distant laugh from somewhere below. The ordinary music of a place that kept going regardless of what any individual person inside it was managing. He told my daughter there was a cat, Sofia said. I heard. Signora Greco smiled. He does that sometimes. Leads with the cat. In the afternoon, while Emilia slept, Sofia sat at the kitchen table and did what she always did when the surface level of things was not immediately requiring her attention. She let herself think. She thought about the marriage, not the ending of it, which she had been over in her mind so many times it had lost its texture, but the beginning. The way Rocco had been at the start, attentive, precise, a man who noticed things about her that other people missed. She had mistaken that noticing for understanding. It had taken her 2 years to learn that noticing and understanding were entirely different abilities, that a person could map you completely without ever knowing what the map was for. Nico Ferrara noticed things. She had been aware of this from the first moment in the reception hall, the breadbasket, the trembling she thought she'd hidden, the specific quality of his attention to Emilia. But the noticing had a different texture. It didn't feel like inventory. It felt like care was too large a word for what they were, 12 hours into a situation that had begun with a wrong number. But it felt like the precondition of care, the quality of attention that preceded it. She thought about what Signora Greco had said. He keeps this place separate from everything else. She thought about why that mattered and told herself it was too soon to know. Her phone rang. An unknown number, not the blocked one she recognized as his, but unknown in the way of unknown. She answered because her clients sometimes called from numbers she didn't have saved. Sofia. Rocco's voice. She went very still. How do you have this number? I have everything you have, he said. You changed your phone. It took me 3 weeks. That's not the point. Don't call me. Who is he? His voice was controlled, which was worse than when it wasn't. The control meant he had been thinking, had been sitting with it, had organized the rage into something more useful and therefore more dangerous. The man last night. Who is he to you? Goodbye, Rocco. I spoke to Emilia in the garden, he said, and she heard the specific quality in his voice that she had learned, over 4 years, to recognize not threat, not yet, but the approach of it. The clearing of the throat before the thing that could not be unsaid. She looks well. She still has your eyes. Sofia hung up. She sat at the kitchen table with the phone in her hands, and the sound of the city outside, and the sound of Emilia sleeping down the hall, and she breathed. She breathed the way she had learned to breathe. Slowly, thoroughly, one complete breath at a time. Then she called the blocked number. He answered on the second ring. He has my new number, she said. He called just now. A pause. Not long. What did he say? He asked who you were. He mentioned Emilia. She kept her voice level. He's not going to back off just because you spoke to him. No, Nico said. He's not. The conversation with Vitali is happening in 2 hours. His voice was exactly what it always was. Certain. I'll be there before dark. He got my number in 3 weeks, Sofia said. After I changed phones. He said it himself. I know. That means he has someone helping him. Someone with access to carrier records, or, I know, he said again. Sofia. The way he said her name was different from the first time he'd said it. In the reception hall then it had been verification, confirmation of identity. Now it was something else. Grounding, maybe. The use of a name to hold a person in the present moment. I'm going to handle this. All of it. Trust the process. I trust you, she said. I'm telling you what I know because you told me you wanted to know it. A brief silence. Then, yes, I did say that. Something had shifted slightly in his voice, an acknowledgement of something. She wasn't sure what. Thank you for calling me directly. That seemed faster than a note under the door. He made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she'd heard from him. It was brief and low and completely unperformed. I'll see you before dark, he said, and was gone. If you're as deep into this story as I am right now, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. I upload new stories every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Your support is the reason I keep going. Now, back to them. He was back at 6. Emilia had woken from her nap and eaten an orange and was sitting on the kitchen floor conducting a detailed examination of everything in Rosaria's lower cabinets that she had been given permission to examine, which Rosaria had generously interpreted as the cabinet containing Tupperware and spare wooden spoons. The sounds of this investigation, a comprehensive clatter conducted with the cheerful industry of someone who had never met a storage solution they didn't find interesting, filled the apartment with the particular aliveness that children brought to spaces, the reminder that things were for using, that the world was fundamentally interactive. Nico came in and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the child on the floor surrounded by Tupperware lids and wooden spoons and the concentrated pleasure of absolute engagement. And something happened to his face that Sofia caught from across the room. She was sitting at the table with her notebook. She'd been making a list of what she needed from the apartment, organizing it so she could give it to Rosaria if she decided to take that option, and she looked up when he came in and she caught it. The expression, brief as a shadow passing over water, but real. Something that lived below the surface of his face had surfaced, just for a second, at the sight of a small child's complete absorption in a task that had no consequence whatsoever for anyone. She looked back down at her notebook before he saw her looking. How did it go, she asked. He came to the table and sat down, actually sat, which was unusual. He was carrying something, she realized, a tiredness that he was not performing but was not entirely hiding either. the kind that came not from physical effort, but from the sustained application of a particular kind of will. The kind of tired that came from a day of moving pieces on a board where every piece had its own intentions. Vitali has been spoken to, he said. He won't facilitate Rocco's access to information about you. He'll instruct Rocco to let this go. And if Rocco doesn't follow his instruction, then Vitali withdraws his protection and Rocco loses the only thing that makes him feel safe. He looked at her directly, which means Rocco either backs off or he acts without backup. A man who acts without backup is easier to address than one who believes he's covered. You want him to act without backup. He met her eyes. I want him to make a choice that produces a clear outcome. Sofia looked at him for a long moment. The person who got him my number, she said. The one helping him access carrier records. A low-level technician at the phone company. 2 of Vitali's people put him up to it. He paused. That access has been revoked. How? The technician was offered a conversation about his choices and a reason to make different ones going forward. Sofia looked at the table. She thought about the infrastructure of what he was describing, the reach, the speed, the specific and layered way he moved through a problem. She thought about being invisible for 14 months, about moving twice, about the new phone and the careful deleted histories, and all the small, exhausting work of trying to maintain a perimeter against someone who was smaller than the system, but more persistent than it. And she thought about how, in 24 hours, the perimeter had simply changed in size. I need to tell you something, she said. Tell me. When I left Rocco, when I actually left, the night I left he was very calm about it. That was the frightening part. I had expected anger, and he gave me calm. He helped me carry 2 bags to the door. He told me I'd be back in a week. She looked at her hands. He said that in the way of someone who genuinely believed it. Not as a threat, as a fact. Because in his model of the world, you had nowhere to go. Yes, I had no money of my own. He'd managed everything. Always had a reason why it made sense for him to handle the accounts. I had a daughter who was 2 years old. I had skills that would take time to turn into income. He believed all of those things added up to me coming back. What did you do instead? I moved in with my mother for 6 weeks. I found 3 clients for alterations through a neighbor who did tailoring. I found the first apartment. She traced the grain of the table with 1 finger. I called in a favor from a lawyer my cousin had used for something unrelated and got the restraining order filed. She paused, and then I just kept going, one day at a time. Some days the math barely worked, and some days it didn't work at all. But I kept going. Nico was watching her with the full attention he brought to everything. Not analyzing, she thought. Not cataloging. Just present. He didn't expect that, she said. He still doesn't, in some fundamental way. He comes to weddings and gardens, and he finds my new number, because in his mind the outcome is already decided. I come back eventually, because where else would I go? Every time I don't come back, it reads to him as an error he needs to correct. Not a choice I'm making. An error. He sees you as a variable he can reset, Nico said quietly. Not a person making decisions. Yes. She looked up at him. And that's why he won't stop. Not because he loves me. He doesn't love me. He doesn't have the capacity for what love requires. He'll stop when the cost of continuing outweighs the need to be right. And nothing so far has made the cost high enough. There was a sound from the kitchen floor. Emilia, who had assembled several Tupperware lids into what appeared to be a tower, and was now regarding it with the critical eye of a structural engineer. The tower fell. Emilia made a sound of philosophical acceptance and began reassembling it. Rosaria, from her position by the stove, watched with the quiet amusement of someone who had long since made peace with entropy. Nico was looking at Emilia. The expression was back, the one she'd caught earlier and looked away from. She didn't look away this time. She watched it happen. The careful, private expression of a man who had spent years perfecting the art of not being moved by things, discovering that a 4-year-old rebuilding a tower of Tupperware lids on a kitchen floor was apparently outside the jurisdiction of that practice. She does that, Sofia said quietly. Rebuilds. Every time. She never gets upset that it fell. She just starts again. He was quiet for a moment. Then, does she understand what's happening? With Rocco. She understands that some situations call for whispering and some call for holding hands when we cross streets. Sofia watched her daughter. She doesn't have the language for the rest of it yet. I've tried to keep the language away from her for as long as I can. How long can you? Not much longer. Her voice was steady. which is part of why this has to end. Not just for me. For her. Because she's learning how to read my face. She watches me for information the way children do when they sense the adults around them are managing things. I don't want her growing up fluent in that kind of reading. That's not a language anyone should have to learn. Emilia looked up and found her mother's eyes across the room. Mama, she said. The tower fell again. I see that. I'm going to build it differently this time. Good idea. Emilia went back to the lids with renewed purpose. Nico was still watching her. After a moment, he turned back to Sofia, and whatever had been open in his expression had settled back into something quieter and more controlled, but it wasn't gone. It had joined the inventory of the room, and it wasn't leaving. There's one more thing, Nico said. About Rocco. Tell me. He has a debt. Not to Vitali, to someone else. Older than the Vitali connection. About 3 years old, which would place it during your marriage. He looked at her steadily. Did you know he borrowed money from outside legitimate channels during the marriage? Sofia went still. How much money? Enough that the people he borrowed it from have been patient longer than is typical. He paused. They've been patient because they believed eventually they would be in a position to collect not just money but leverage. Rocco has value to them as long as he has access to certain things. Access that he's been trading on your connection to people and places that might be useful. My family, she said slowly. My cousin Alessio, the Corsi family, they have business interests that, yes. The full shape of it assembled in front of her like something she had been looking at sideways for years and was only now turning to face directly. Rocco's insistence on attending family events, his careful cultivation of her relatives, the way he had always been so present at the Corsi gatherings, so interested in her uncle's business, so attentive to her cousin's connections. She had thought it was performance, a man showing his wife off, building a social world around himself. It had not occurred to her that she was the mechanism and the Corsi family was the target. He married me, she said, to get to my family. Partly. Nico's voice was careful. I don't think you were only instrumental. But the access you provided was part of the calculation. He never loved me. I can't know that. But I know the debt predates the marriage by 6 months, and the people he owes it to were made aware of the Corsi connection within a year of the wedding. Sofia sat with that for a long moment. She thought about being 24 years old and believing that a man who noticed things about her was a man who understood her. She thought about the apartment, the accounts, the careful management of her access to her own life. She thought about the 4 years of a marriage that had been, on some level she had never been able to articulate clearly, the feeling of being inside a room that got slightly smaller every month. Not dramatically, not in any way that would be easy to point to. Just smaller, until the room was the size of a person and the person was her. I need you to understand something, she said. Her voice was very even. I'm not asking you to fix this for me. I'm not asking you to clean up my mistake. What I'm asking, she stopped. I don't know exactly what I'm asking. But it's not that. I know it's not that. He said it without hesitation. What you're asking is to not be alone in it. That's different. She looked at him. Yes. That I can do. The evening came on slowly, the way summer evenings did in this city, the light thickening to amber and then to the particular gold that made the old stone walls look briefly like something from a painting, the heat releasing itself from the streets in gradual, reluctant increments. Rosaria made dinner. Pasta in a simple sauce, bread, salad, the kind of meal that required no announcement and fed everyone and was, in its straightforwardness, a form of care. They ate at the kitchen table, the 4 of them, Nico, Sofia, Emilia, and Rosaria, in the easy quiet of people who had not known each other long, but were not strangers anymore. Emilia ate her pasta and asked Nico whether Bep had ever been to the sea. He considered this question with complete seriousness. I don't know, he said. I've never asked him. You should ask him, Emilia advised. He might want to go. That's a fair point. I've been to the sea, Emilia said. Mama took me last summer. I found a shell. A pause of the kind that held something important. I kept it. It's at home. In your room? Sofia asked. On the windowsill. The small one, not the big one. She looked at her mother. Is it still there? Yes, baby. Of course it's still there. Good. Emilia resumed eating, the matter settled. Sofia looked at her plate, and then at the window, and then, briefly, at Nico. He was looking at Emilia. He caught Sofia's eye, and there was a moment, brief, specific, existing entirely in the space between them where they had not yet said anything about the fact that something was accumulating there, and then they both looked away. After Emilia was in bed, Sofia stood in the small bedroom doorway listening to her daughter breathe. The pearl clip was on the nightstand. The flower was beside it. The shell was somewhere in an apartment 2 kilometers away on a windowsill that Sofia hoped was still safe to go back to. She went to the kitchen. Nico was there, standing by the window with his phone, finishing whatever the last thread of the day's work required. He looked up when she came in. "She's asleep," Sofia said. "She eats very thoroughly," he said. "She finishes everything. She always has. Even when she was a baby. She approached feeding with the same intensity she brings to Tupperware." Is that a Mancini trait? Sofia thought about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs for 10 years and never left anything on her plate and never asked anyone to feel sorry for her. "It might be," she said. She sat at the table. He put the phone away and came to sit across from her, and they were back in the configuration of the night before the lamp, the table, the kitchen quiet around them, the city's nighttime sounds coming through the window. She had the sensation of a rhythm establishing itself, which was strange and too fast, and probably unwise, and also undeniably there. "The dress," she said. "The one due in 8 days. I've decided I'll take Rosaria's offer and have the materials brought here. I can work from this table." She looked at the surface, measuring it. "It's big enough. Whatever you need. I need a good lamp. The light in here is warm, but not bright enough for close work. I use a daylight bulb at home. Rosaria will get one tomorrow. And I'll need the machine. It's a Bernina. It weighs a reasonable amount. It will be here tomorrow." "You don't know what a Bernina is," she said. "I know it will be here tomorrow," he said evenly, and she caught the slight lift at the corner of his mouth that she was beginning to understand was his version of humor. "My clients," she said. 3 of them are due for fittings in the next 5 days. I'll need to contact them and either reschedule or ask them to come here instead of the apartment. This address shouldn't be given to people we don't know," he said. Not unkindly. Just a fact requiring accommodation. Then I'll reschedule them. They're all women with wedding dates they care about more than the inconvenience. They'll understand." She paused. "And after tomorrow, when you take me to the apartment, I want to see the state of it. Not to move back in, not yet, but to understand what I'm dealing with." "All right. You're agreeing to things very easily tonight. You're asking for reasonable things," he said. "I don't complicate reasonable things." Sofia looked at him. "What do you complicate?" He held her gaze. Something passed across his expression, not quite the same as the moment in the reception hall, not the absolute certainty she'd first read in him, but something more like its interior. The version that existed when no one was performing anything for anyone. "Unreasonable things," he said quietly. "Sometimes I complicate those." The air in the kitchen was very still. Sofia looked at her hands on the table, the calluses on her fingertips from the needle and thread, the small scar on her left index finger from a rotary cutter 12 years ago, hands that had built a life one careful stitch at a time through circumstances that had no business being survivable. She looked at them the way she sometimes did when she needed to remember that she was more than the things that had happened to her. "I have a question," she said. "Ask it. Why does Signora Greco have hearing aids from the building management fund that doesn't exist?" A pause. "Then, she told you that. She said it was a relevant variable." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was very even. "She's lived in this building for 40 years. She had her husband here, and her son before he moved to Milan, and the specific accumulated life of a person who belongs to a place. When the hearing aid stopped working and she couldn't afford the new ones, I was aware of it." He paused. That's all," Sofia repeated. "Yes. You left hearing aids outside an 81-year-old woman's door and invented a fund to make sure she didn't feel she owed you anything." "I didn't want her to feel," he stopped. "To feel what?" "Diminished," he said finally. "By needing something." Sofia looked at him for a long, quiet moment. She thought about everything she had been told about the Ferrara name. She thought about the version of this man that the city knew, the version that sent Rocco walking from a reception hall with 20 words in a quiet voice. She thought about what Signora Greco had said. "He pretends not to be kind. He's very practiced at it." "I'm not going to tell anyone," she said. "I didn't think you would. But I'm filing it." He raised an eyebrow slightly, the gesture of a man and used to his private information being filed by other people. "Under what category?" Relevant variables, she said. Something shifted in his expression, that interior thing again, that quality of something settled and real. He picked up his wine glass, a small movement that contained none of the deliberateness she usually saw in him, and she understood that this was what Nico Ferrara looked like when he was not being careful. Not careless, just present, without the architecture of management around it. I should go, he said, though he didn't move. You should sleep. I know. Neither of them moved. The lamp held its warm circle on the table between them. Outside, the city continued its nighttime register, quieter, lower, the sounds of its actual life rather than its performance of life. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. The apartment. And after that, he paused in the way of someone choosing precision over speed. After that, we addressed the situation with Rocco properly. Not around the edges. At the center. What does that mean? It means that telling Vitali and finding Alessio and revoking a technician's access are scaffolding. They hold things in place while the actual structure is built. He met her eyes. The actual structure is making it unambiguous to Rocco that you are not a variable he can reset, that the category he has you in no longer applies. And how do you make that unambiguous? By making the cost of ignoring it specific enough that he can't pretend not to understand it. He said it quietly, not threateningly, the way you stated any fact. He's a man who only believes in costs he can calculate. We're going to show him one he can't argue with. Sofia thought about Rocco standing outside the church for 40 minutes. About the calm in his voice on the phone. About the coin extended toward Emilia. About 4 years of rooms getting smaller, and a marriage built on access rather than love, and a man who had mistaken her survival instinct for something he owned. I want to be part of it, she said. When it happens, whatever it is. Sofia, I'm not asking to be in the room when it gets dangerous. I'm asking not to be kept in the kitchen while my own life gets decided. She held his gaze. You said I wasn't asking to be rescued. I said I was asking not to be alone in it. This is what not being alone in it looks like. I'm part of the decisions. He looked at her for a long moment. Something was moving through his expression, resistance, she thought, but not the resistance of someone who disagreed. The resistance of someone who was used to moving alone and was recalculating what it meant not to. Yes, he said finally. You're part of the decisions. It was not a small concession, she understood. She wasn't certain he understood she understood, but she filed it anyway. Under relevant variables. Next to the hearing aids and the cat, and the way he had walked past Rocco without looking at him and changed everything. Good, she said. Then go home and sleep. You were up until 4. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely decode. Then he stood. At the door he stopped. She was learning his doorway pauses, the things that came out in them, and turned back. The shell, he said. She blinked. What? Emilia's shell. From the sea last summer. On the windowsill. He looked at her directly. When we go to the apartment tomorrow, we'll get it. Sofia looked at him in the kitchen doorway at the end of the second day of a situation that had begun with a wrong number and was becoming something she did not have the right word for yet. She looked at this man who had come to a church because there was a child and who had left hearing aids outside an old woman's door so she wouldn't feel diminished by needing something, and who remembered a detail about a shell on a windowsill from the middle of a dinner conversation. Something in her chest opened very slightly. The way a window opens, not the whole wall, just the window. Just enough to let the air through. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and left. Sofia sat alone in the kitchen for a while after the door closed. She could hear the building's quiet Rosaria somewhere settling in for the night. Signora Greco's television low through the wall. Emilia's breathing down the hall, steady and deep and safe. She thought about the shell on the windowsill. About small specific things remembered by people who claimed not to be paying that kind of attention. She thought about the window she'd opened and told herself she was allowed to leave it open for a little while, just to see what the air felt like. The next morning brought problems, as mornings did, but these were the manageable kind, the kind with solutions. The Bernina arrived by 9 o'clock, carried up 3 flights of stairs by a man who did not introduce himself, but handled the machine with the specific care of someone who had been told it mattered. The daylight bulb arrived with it. Rosaria set up the workspace at the far end of the kitchen table with the practicality of someone transforming rooms into functions, and by 10 Sofia had her materials spread out and her client's dress laid across the table and was doing the thing she knew how to do. Emilia drew pictures beside her, and explained each one with extensive narration directed at Bep, who had been introduced to the kitchen and was sitting on the windowsill with the expression of a cat who had decided this was acceptable. Nico arrived at 11. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the scene: the fabric on the table, the machine, the daylight bulb casting its clean working light, the child drawing at the end of the table, the cat on the windowsill, Rosaria making coffee with the serene efficiency of someone for whom chaos was simply a form of order she hadn't categorized yet, and something in his face did the thing it kept doing. That brief, unguarded opening. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes." Sofia put down her pens. "Emilia, I'm going out with Nico for a little while. Rosaria is here. You may ask Signora Greco if Bep can stay if he wants to." Emilia looked up from her drawing. She looked at Nico with her direct 4-year-old assessment. "Will you bring back my shell?" she asked. Nico looked at her with the absolute seriousness he gave things that deserved it. "Yes," he said. "The small one on the windowsill," Emilia specified. "Not the big one." "The small one," he confirmed. Emilia nodded, satisfied. She went back to her drawing. Nico caught Sofia's eye across the kitchen, and there it was again, the thing in the air between them that neither of them had named, but both of them could feel. Specific and accumulating and not going anywhere. The drive to the apartment took 10 minutes. Nico's driver parked on the street outside. Not a black car today, but something less conspicuous, a navy sedan with no particular presence. The building was as Sofia had left it 2 days ago. Her landlord's number on the door, the dry cleaner below with its smell of chemical clean and warm fabric, the narrow staircase up to the second-floor apartment that had been, for 8 months, the closest thing to safe she had. The door was intact. The lock was as she'd left it. Inside, the apartment was exactly as it was. Workroom table, spare bedroom, small kitchen, the particular organized chaos of a person who had learned to run her life in a small space and had gotten very efficient at it. The windowsill in the workroom held the shell, small, pale, almost perfectly round, the kind of thing a child picked up on a beach because it fit exactly in a palm and felt like something. Sofia moved through the apartment quickly, adding things to the bag she'd brought. Work materials, more clothes for Emilia, the specific sewing notions she needed, her client files, the address book she still kept on paper because some habits outlasted their reasons. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had gotten good at leaving places quickly. Nico stood near the door. He was not watching her, he was watching the room. Reading it the way she imagined, he read everything, gathering information from what was there and what wasn't. She realized, very little. The apartment was functional and clean and entirely without excess. Every object had a reason for being there. She had shed her life down to its necessities so many times over the last 14 months that necessities were all that remained. "The shell," he said, from the doorway of the workroom. "On the windowsill." She was folding something into the bag. "Can you get it?" He crossed the room and picked it up. She looked up and watched him hold it in his palm, this man with the reach that had moved Vitali by phone and unraveled Rocco's access to her number and delivered hearing aids anonymously to an old woman holding a child's shell from the sea with the same attention he brought to everything. She watched his face. He wasn't performing the consideration of it. He was just looking at it. She found it herself, Sofia said. Walked right past a dozen bigger ones. Picked this one up and said it was the right one. She knew what she was looking for, Nico said. She usually does, Sofia said quietly. She gets that from someone. He looked at her across the workroom of her stripped-down apartment, and the thing in the air between them was very close to the surface now, close enough that not naming it was starting to require active effort from both of them, and they were both aware of that, and neither of them looked away. Then his phone rang. He answered it. His expression changed, that immediate shift into operational focus, the closing of the interior thing, not coldly, but necessarily. He listened for approximately 4 seconds and said, "How long ago?" Another 2 seconds. "Give me the address." He hung up. "What is it?" Sofia asked. "Rocco was at your mother's house this morning." His voice was very controlled. "He left 20 minutes ago. He spoke to her at the door. She's not hurt." He paused. "But he told her where you are." "He doesn't know where I am." "He told her you're with Nicolò Ferrara." His eyes were steady on hers. "And he told her what that means. What he wanted her to think it means." Sofia was very still for a moment. Then she picked up her bag and straightened. "We need to go." "We need to go," he agreed. In the car heading back, Sofia sat with her bag on her lap and her hands clasped and the cold, specific understanding that Rocco had just changed the game. Not by coming to the apartment, not by calling her new number, by going to her mother, by putting a version of this story into the ears of the person whose opinion Sofia cared about most, by making it a family matter, a reputation matter, the kind of matter that traveled through networks of love and worry and produced exactly the kind of pressure that had always, in the past, been enough to make her doubt herself. He's trying to isolate you, Nico said. Not a question. He had understood what Rocco had done in the same moment she had. He's very good at it, she said. He's been doing it since before we were married. My mother loves me and she worries about me, and if she believes what he told her, she'll call. And the call will be full of concern, and it will come from love, and that's what makes it effective. Because I can't be angry at her for worrying. What do you want to do? Sofia thought about her mother, her practical, loving, perpetually worried mother who had worked 2 jobs and finished everything on her plate and handled the sea with equanimity. Who deserved the truth? I want to call her, Sofia said. Right now? Before whatever Rocco told her has time to set. Then call her. She called. Her mother answered on the second ring with the specific tone of a woman who had been waiting. Sofia said, Mama, I know Rocco came to the house. I know what he told you. I need you to listen to me first, before we talk about any of it. Can you do that? Her mother said yes. Sofia talked for 8 minutes straight. She told her mother the truth, not all of it. Not the parts that would require explanations she wasn't ready to give, but the essential truth. She had called a wrong number. A man had helped her when she needed help. She was safe. Emilia was safe. The version Rocco had given her was the version Rocco needed her to believe, which was the version in which Sofia had done something reckless and compromising. Because if her mother believed that, she would put pressure on Sofia to come home, which was where Rocco needed her to be. Her mother was quiet for a moment at the end of the 8 minutes. Then she said, I always knew it was you, not him. I just didn't want to know. Sofia closed her eyes in the back of the car. I know, Mama. Her mother said, I'll call Julia. She'll handle Alessio. Her mother had always been practical. After she hung up, Nico said nothing for a moment. Then, good. She's practical, Sofia said. Practicality is a form of love in my family. It's a form of love in most families, he said. That doesn't announce itself. Sofia looked at him in the moving light of the street. He's escalating, she said. Every time we close a route, he finds another one. The new number, the family, my mother. Each one is faster than the last. Yes. Which means the next move is something we haven't anticipated. Which is why, Nico said. And his voice had the particular quality she had come to understand was not coldness, but absolute resolution, the voice of a man who had made a decision and meant it in every direction at once. We stop waiting for the next move and make ours. She looked at him. The shell was in her bag. The city moved past the windows. In an apartment 3 kilometers away, her daughter was drawing pictures and narrating them to an orange cat, and building towers out of Tupperware lids and knocking them down and starting again without distress, because she had not yet learned to be afraid of things falling. What's our move? Sofia asked. Nico looked at her directly. We make it visible, he said. Not just to Rocco. To everyone he knows, everyone Vitali knows, everyone in any network he uses to feel protected. We make it visible that you are not a problem he can manage around. That trying to reach you, in any form, through any person, in any direction has a consequence that is specific and immediate and attached to my name. A public claim, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. She understood what that meant, not romantically. Not yet. They were not there yet. But in the language of the world he moved through, where claim meant protection and protection meant that the cost of coming for her had just become the cost of coming for him. It was territorial and absolute, and it was the specific kind of thing that a man like Rocco, whose boldness came entirely from a calculated assessment of what he could get away with, could not dismiss or minimize or find a route around. And if he comes anyway, she said, if even that isn't enough? The car stopped outside the building. Nico looked at her in the stillness before they got out, and his eyes were very steady and entirely without performance, and completely certain in the way that she had come to understand was not arrogance, but the specific gravity of a man who had never once in his life said something he didn't mean. Then I deal with it, he said. Permanently. Sofia held his gaze. She thought about the word permanently. She thought about what it contained. She thought about being 28 years old and tired and doing it anyway, about a daughter on a kitchen floor rebuilding towers, about a shell found on a beach because it was the right one. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They got out of the car. He held the door. She walked toward the building entrance, and he fell into step beside her, and they walked through the entrance of the building together, and the door closed behind them. And above on the third floor an orange cat was sleeping in a patch of sunlight, and a 4-year-old was drawing pictures, and Rosaria was making something that smelled like it would be good, and the city was doing what it always did, and something that had been building since a wrong number rang in a church bathroom 2 days ago was no longer just building. It had become, quietly, irrevocably, a fact. The dinner happened 3 days later. It was not a large event. It was not designed to be. The table at Ferrara's restaurant on the Via dei Mercanti seated 12, and on the night in question there were 9 people at it. 3 men whose names moved through the city's business networks the way weather moved through open country felt before it arrived, remembered after it passed their wives. Dante, who was Nico's second, Sofia, who handled his legal operations, and Sofia Mancini. No title, no introduction that announced anything. Simply present, at Nico Ferrara's right hand, at a table where no one sat at Nico Ferrara's right hand unless he had placed them there. The restaurant itself was the kind of place that had no sign on the street. You knew about it because someone told you, and they told you because they had been invited, and the invitation itself was a form of information. The food was exceptional. The wine was chosen by someone who understood that wine was not decoration. The service was invisible in the way of things that had been so thoroughly perfected they had ceased to require acknowledgement. Sofia had been here before, in a different life once, with Rocco, 3 years ago, at a corporate event held in the private dining room. She had not known then whose restaurant it was. She understood now why Rocco had wanted to be there, what proximity to this room had meant to him. Access. The suggestion of adjacency to something he could not actually reach. She wore the green dress she had worn to the wedding. She had nothing else suitable. Nico had not mentioned it, and would not have she understood this about him by now. The specific quality of his tact, which was not the tact of someone who had learned that certain observations were impolitic, but the tact of someone who genuinely did not care about the things that did not matter. The dress was clean. She was present. Those were the relevant facts. Rosaria had pressed it for her anyway, that morning, hanging it on the back of the bathroom door without saying a word. The conversation at the table ranged across things that sounded, to ears that didn't know how to listen, like ordinary business discussion, property, logistics, the particular friction of bureaucratic processes that could be managed if you knew the right pressure points. Sofia listened and understood approximately half of the subtext and filed the rest for later examination. She ate well. She answered questions when they were directed at her about her work, which 3 of the 9 people present expressed genuine interest in. About Emilia, who had been described by Nico to the table with a specificity that made Dante glance at him once, and then look away with the practiced neutrality of a man filing a significant observation. She held the table's register correctly, saying enough to be present and not enough to overreach. And she did this not because she had been coached, but because she had spent years reading rooms that required careful calibration, and this was simply a different room requiring the same skill. At a certain point in the evening, one of the men, Garizio, the oldest, the one with the property interests and the decades-deep network, leaned slightly toward Nico and said, in the tone of a man making an observation he knew would be received, "She's Corsi family, yes? On the mother's side." "Mancini," Nico said. "Her grandmother was Corsi." He said it without emphasis, without explanation, with the particular quality of a man who was not justifying a presence he had already decided on. Garizio nodded. He looked at Sofia once more. Not assessing, she thought. Registering. The way people registered things that had been decided and were therefore simply facts about the world that required acknowledgement rather than evaluation. "Good family," Garizio said, and returned to his wine. Sofia kept her face entirely still and registered, in the private space beneath her expression, that something had just shifted. Not dramatically. These things never happen dramatically in rooms like this. But the shift was real and its consequences would travel, and by morning the information would be in the specific networks where information of this kind was most needed. Rocco Salva would know. Vitali would have already known since the phone call, but now the knowing was formal. Now it had witnesses at a table. On the drive back to the building, Emilia, asleep against Sofia's shoulder, Rosaria, had brought her in the separate car, and she had lasted approximately 45 minutes at the smaller table in the restaurant's side room before becoming horizontal. Sofia looked out at the nighttime city and thought about what had just happened. That was the point, she said. Not a question. Part of it, Nico said. Gorizio will tell people. Gorizio will tell the right people, he said. There's a difference. The right people being the ones connected to anyone who might be connected to Rocco. Yes. Sofia shifted Emilia's weight slightly. Her daughter was entirely asleep, the way she was entirely everything with complete, unheld commitment. Will it be enough? She asked. Nico looked at her directly. For most of it, he said. Yes. Most of it, she repeated. There's a version of this where Rocco understands the signal and makes a rational decision. His voice was measured, honest. And there's a version where he doesn't, where the need to be right outweighs what the calculation says, where he decides that what he's losing is more important than the cost of coming for it. He paused. I think you know which version he is. She did know. She had known for 4 years and 14 months, and every day in between. He'll come, she said. Yes, but when he does, he'll come into something he didn't expect. She looked at him. What? Preparation, he said simply. We've given him 3 days to calculate. What he doesn't know is that we've spent those 3 days calculating faster. Emilia made a small sound in her sleep. Sofia smoothed her hair. Tell me what you've done, she said. He told her, quietly, completely, the way he had told her everything without drama, without the selective editing that people employed when they wanted someone's compliance, but not their full understanding. He told her about the conversations with 2 of Rocco's former business partners, both of whom had been waiting for a reason to distance themselves and had been given one. He told her about the financial documentation, the debt, the money processing, the paper trail that existed in a form that would be very useful to specific prosecutors if it were ever provided to them. He told her about the phone call made to Rocco directly, not from his own number, but through Dante, which had delivered one sentence. Vitali has withdrawn his cover. You cut him loose, Sofia said. Vitali cut him loose. At my suggestion. And Rocco knows that you're the reason. He knows. He looked at the street ahead, which means he also knows that everything he had to feel safe with is gone. The protection, the access to information, the business network, all of it is in the process of collapsing. The only thing he has left is the belief that he can still get to you. So he'll try. He'll try, Nico confirmed. Soon. A man watching everything he built dissolve moves quickly when he moves. He'll want to do it before he loses whatever nerve he has left. And when he does, he meets what we've prepared. He turned to look at her in the moving dark of the car. And it ends. She held his gaze. I need to know exactly what ends means. It means he makes a choice, Nico said carefully. In front of witnesses, against a prepared response, with his full understanding of who I am and what continuing this will cost him. Not a phone call in private. Not a message through a family member. A direct confrontation that produces an outcome that cannot be walked back. He paused. What happens in that confrontation depends on what choices he makes. If he's violent, then the response is proportional and immediate, and he does not walk away from it in any condition that allows him to try again. Sofia sat with that for a moment. She thought about the word proportional in the mouth of a man for whom proportion was a professional vocabulary. She thought about what she wanted not abstractly, but specifically, clearly, in the honest privacy of the back of a car at night with her sleeping daughter warm against her shoulder. She thought about Emilia in a church garden with a coin extended toward her, about a wedding ring left on a bathroom counter the night she left, placed with the precise care of a man who wanted her to understand that her departure was temporary. About 14 months of counting down from ceiling in bedrooms she moved out of. She thought about the window she had opened 2 nights ago in a kitchen, and what the air had felt like coming through it. All right, she said. They went up. Rosaria took Emilia. The building settled into its nighttime quiet, and Sofia went to bed and slept 6 hours without interruption, which was the sleep of someone who had made a decision and meant it, and was finished carrying the weight of its opposite. Rocco came on a Thursday. It was mid-morning. Sofia was at the kitchen table with the wedding dress spread before her, working the bodice seam with the concentration of close work, the daylight bulb casting its clean and functional light. Emilia was in Signora Greco's apartment, a daily arrangement now, one that had established itself with the naturalness of things that worked, and Rosaria was at the market. Dante was in the hallway, which was not unusual. One of Nico's people was always in the hallway, present as a fixture, low profile and necessary in the way of good infrastructure. Nico was at the kitchen table too, across from her, reading something on his laptop. This had also become a pattern over the past 3 days. He worked from the apartment in the mornings, brought the day's business here rather than requiring Sofia to fit into the shape of his elsewhere. She had not asked him to do this. He had simply done it, the way he did most things, without announcement, as a plain fact of the situation that required no particular discussion. She was aware of him the way she had become aware of most things that were present and reliable, not in the consuming way of novelty, but in the specific way of something that had entered the register of the ordinary and was now noticed most clearly in its absence. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Not his blocked one. She looked at it. Nico looked at her. She answered, "You need to bring my daughter to the building in trance." Rocco's voice, controlled, cold, and carrying beneath the control the specific quality of a man who was running low on something essential. "Now? I know she's there. I know which floor." Sofia kept her voice level. "Emilia is not here." "Don't. She is not in this building at this moment," Sofia said. "Which you would know if you actually knew what I know. Which you don't." She looked at Nico. He was already on his feet, phone to his ear, moving toward the hallway. "Rocco, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm done listening to you. You've made choices that, the choices I've made are mine to make," she said. Her voice was steady. She had prepared for this without knowing she was preparing, had been preparing for it for 14 months, really, every day that she had gotten up and kept going having been a form of rehearsal. "You're outside this building or close to it. I know that. The people who are also outside this building know it too. Before you do whatever you've come here to do, I need you to understand something." A pause. He was listening. That was the thing about Rocco. Beneath all of it, beneath the certainty and the control and the management of variables, there was a man who believed that if he could simply get the right information, he could still navigate his way to the outcome he had decided on. He was still calculating. He would listen as long as he thought the information might be useful. "This is over," Sofia said. "Not because someone is making it over for me. Because I am making it over. I made that choice when I left, and I've made it every day since, and I am making it right now. You lost the protection you had. You lost the access you had. The money you've been processing, the documentation for that, is in the hands of people who will use it if you give them a reason to." She paused. "I'm giving you one exit. Walk away. Go home. Don't come back. If you do that, the documentation stays where it is, and this ends here. You don't have that documentation. Nicolò Ferrara does," she said. "And you know what that means." The silence on the line was 3 seconds long. She counted them. "You think he'll protect you?" Rocco said finally. Something had shifted in his voice. The control was still there, but something underneath it had cracked. And what came through the crack was not rage, but the specific sound of a man who has run the calculation and found it going the wrong way and cannot quite accept the result. "You think because he's put you at his table and given you somewhere to sleep, he cares what happens to you. Men like that don't. I'll tell you what I know about men like that," Sofia said quietly. "I know that a man who came to a stranger's wedding because she said the words 'my daughter,' who was up until 4 in the morning the first night finding out everything about my situation, who remembered a shell on a windowsill because a 4-year-old mentioned it once over dinner, that man is not a man who will lose interest." She held the phone tightly. "I know the difference, Rocco. I lived inside the alternative for 4 years. I know exactly what it felt like. This is not that." Another silence. She heard something outside, not through the phone, through the building's walls. A door. Footsteps on stone. The specific sound of a situation resolving into its final shape. "There are people downstairs," she said. "Right now? They've been there since yesterday. Whatever you came here to do, it cannot be done. And everything you used to feel safe is already gone." She kept her voice even. "Go home, Rocco." Silence. Then the line went dead. Sofia sat at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand, and the wedding dress spread in front of her, and the daylight bulb casting its clean flat light, and the sound of the city coming through the window, warm and present, and entirely indifferent to the specific weight of what had just shifted. Nico came back into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and she looked at him, and the question was in the air between them before either of them spoke. He's at the entrance, Dante's voice said through Nico's phone. He's been standing there for about 2 minutes. He's not moving. Leave him, Nico said. Don't approach. Let him stand. He put the phone down. He came to the table and sat across from her. The same position as every morning, the laptop, the coffee, the work that moved through rooms rather than requiring her to move to it. He looked at her with the full attention that was, she had learned, his baseline mode of being present with another person. Completely there. No fraction of it elsewhere. You talked to him yourself, he said. Yes. You offered him the exit. It was the right thing to do. She set down the phone. If he doesn't take it, then everything that follows is a consequence of his choice, not something that was done to him. His choice. She paused. I needed that to be clear. For myself. Nico looked at her for a moment. Something in his face was doing that thing, the opening, the interior thing, and this time he didn't close it. He let it be there. Yes, he said quietly. It was the right thing. Dante's voice again, from the phone on the table. He's moving. Heading north on the street. He's walking. Nico picked up the phone. Stay with him until he's off the street. Understood. He put the phone down. They were quiet for a moment. The kitchen, the morning light, the wedding dress on the table, the sound of the city going about the business of being the city. He might come back, Sofia said. He might. Nico's voice was level. But he came here with a specific plan, and it didn't work. He stood at the entrance and understood what was waiting for him, and he walked away. That changes the calculation for him. He met her eyes. A man who's made one retreat has told himself a story about why it was the smart move. The next move requires him to revise that story. Some men can do that. Most can't. And if he's one who can, then we deal with it, he said. Permanently. Like I told you. She looked at him. The documentation, the money processing records. Was that real? Do you actually have it? Yes. Would you use it? If he makes it necessary. He said it without hesitation. Rocco Sava processing money for Vitali is not a secret worth protecting. If he comes back, if he makes another move in any direction toward you, toward Emilia, toward anyone in your family, it goes to prosecutors the same day. And that ends him. That ends that version of him. He paused. The version that feels protected. The version that takes coins to church gardens. Sofia was quiet. She thought about the man she had married at 24, believing she was marrying someone who saw her. About the process of understanding, over 4 years, that being seen and being managed were not the same thing, and that she had mistaken one for the other, and that the mistake had been partly hers to make, and mostly not. She thought about the specific cost of carrying that distinction around the daily work of refusing to accept the blame that Rocco had tried to install in her the way you installed a fixture, quietly, incrementally, until it seemed like it had always been there. I'm going to finish this seam, she said. She picked up the needle. And then I'm going to call my client and reschedule her fitting for tomorrow. All right. And after that, she stopped. Looked at him. I'd like to take Emilia to the sea, she said. Not today. Not this week. But soon. She's been talking about it since we got her shell. Something moved in Nico's face. The weekend after next, he said. I know a place on the Campanian coast. Private. The water is clear. You know a place, she repeated. I know several places, he said, and the corner of his mouth did its thing. This one has good shells. Emilia will want a full report before she agrees. I expected nothing less. Sofia looked at him across the table, the wedding dress between them, the daylight bulb, the morning, the city, the ordinary persistent fact of him sitting in this kitchen because he had decided to be there, which was the same reason she had decided to stay. She thought about all the things that had not been said yet, and understood that the unsaid things were not problems requiring immediate resolution, but simply the next chapter of something that had already, irrevocably, begun. Go back to your work, she said. I'm going to finish this seam. Yes, he said, and opened his laptop, and she picked up the needle, and they worked in the same room in the same light, and the morning went on around them like mornings did, requiring nothing, offering everything, asking only that you be present in it. Dante's final confirmation came at noon. Rocco had returned to his apartment on the other side of the city and had not left it since. His phone had been active, calls made, calls received, the specific pattern of a man assessing the damage and making accommodations. Vitali had not taken his calls. 2 of the 3 remaining business partners had not taken his calls. The third had spoken to him briefly, and the conversation had lasted 4 minutes. and ended with Rocco's voice going very quiet in the way of someone receiving information they had been hoping not to receive. He had not called Sofia. He had not called her mother. He had not called anyone in the Corsi family. By evening, Nico's people had confirmed the pattern they had been watching for. Rocco Sava was not regrouping. He was retreating. The difference between the two was specific and measurable, and it was the difference between a man planning the next move and a man understanding, for the first time, that the next move was not available to him. There was a conversation yet to come. Nico had been clear about that, honest in the way he was honest about everything. There would need to be a meeting. Formal, witnessed, explicit. The documentation held as collateral for good behavior, not leverage against a man already defeated, but a guarantee signed by all parties that the defeat was permanent. These were the terms, and they would be met, because the only thing worse than understanding you had lost was understanding there was documented evidence of why. But that was next week. That was logistics, the necessary architecture of an ending that required formal structure to hold its shape. Tonight, Emilia ate dinner and told Nico at length about a dream she had in which Bep had learned to speak, and his first word had been her name, which she felt proved something important about their connection. Nico listened with the seriousness the subject deserved and agreed that it was significant evidence. Rosaria served the meal. Signora Greco knocked at the door to return a Tupperware container she had borrowed and stayed for 20 minutes because Emilia asked her to explain the difference between the sea near Palermo and the sea near Naples, a question the old woman answered with the comprehensiveness of someone who had been waiting 81 years for someone young enough to find the distinction genuinely interesting. After Emilia was in bed, Sofia sat on the small balcony that faced east and looked at the city at night. The lights, the movement, the particular quality of darkness over old rooftops, the city being what it was, which was complicated and alive and made of everything people had built and broken and built again in it over centuries. She had a glass of wine. The night was warm. Below, somewhere on the street, someone was playing music from a window, something old, something the city knew by heart. She heard the balcony door, and then Nico was there, standing beside her with his own glass, looking at the same city she was looking at. They were quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that had, over the past 4 days, become its own form of conversation specific to the two of them, carrying things that did not need words to be understood. "I keep thinking about the wrong number," Sofia said. "What about it?" "The margin. 1 digit off. I had saved my brother's number 3 weeks before on the new phone, in a hurry, on a Tuesday night while Emilia was asleep." She turned the glass in her hand. "If I hadn't been rushing, if I checked, if the battery hadn't been dying." "Then you would have called your brother," Nico said. "And you would have had your evening and your contract and your car on the Corso, and none of this would have happened." "Possibly," he said. He was looking at the city, his profile carrying that particular quality she had come to associate with his private thinking, not closed, just interior. Or it would have happened differently. Later. Some other way. "You don't believe in the wrong number," she said. "I believe you called the right one," he said simply. She looked at him. He turned his head and looked back at her, and the thing between them that had been accumulating since a service door in a church and a bread basket passed across a table and a shell held in a palm was right there, present and known and waiting for the shape she was going to give it. "I'm not the same person I was before Rocco," she said. "I need you to know that. Not in the way people say it to mean damaged. I mean," she paused, finding the precision. "I see things differently now. I know how quickly a room can get smaller. I know what it looks like when someone notices you as a form of management. I carry that. I don't think I'll ever put it down." "I know," he said. "I'm telling you because it means I'll be slower about some things than you might expect." She looked at the city, and faster about others. "I've learned not to wait when something is right. I just also need it to be the right time." "I know that too," he said. "I'm not in a hurry. You seem like someone who's always in a hurry." "I'm always efficient," he said. "That's different from hurrying." He turned back to the city. "Hurrying is for people who haven't decided." "I've decided." She looked at him. "Decided what?" He looked at her. "That this is worth being patient for," he said. "You. This." A pause. "Whatever it becomes." Sofia held his gaze in the warm night air, with the music from below and the lights of the city and the particular beauty of things that had not been planned and were better for it. She thought about what she had said to Rocco on the phone. "I know the difference. I lived inside the alternative for 4 years. I know exactly what it felt like. This is not that. It was not that. She had known it from a breadbasket placed within reach. She had known it from a shell held in a palm. She had known it from the hearing aids outside the door of an old woman, so she would not feel diminished by needing something. She had known it the way you knew the right shell on a beach. Not because someone told you, but because it fit in your hand and felt like something, and you picked it up, and it was the right one. She reached out and took his hand. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. Just reached across the small distance between them on the balcony and took his hand, and his fingers closed around hers, and they stood there in the city night with everything still ahead of them, and the music from below, and the particular gold of the old stone, and the summer air carrying the smell of the sea from somewhere beyond the lights. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Some things were complete in the simplest form. The meeting with Rocco happened on a Tuesday, 10 days later. Nico had arranged it with the precision he brought to things that required a specific outcome-neutral ground. Two of his people present, Rocco alone. The documentation laid out on the table like a map of a territory he had believed was his and was no longer. The terms were presented by Sofia, who had a gift for delivering the architecture of an ultimatum with the tone of a person reading from a policy manual. Clear, comprehensive, and entirely without warmth. Rocco signed what was put in front of him. He sat across the table from Nicolò Ferrara, and he signed it. And his signature looked different from the signature of a man who had spent 4 years and 14 months believing the outcome was already decided. It looked like the signature of a man who had understood, finally and completely, what the room contained and what it would cost him to leave it without signing. Sofia was not in the room. She had asked to be. Nico had asked her to consider whether she needed to be. She had thought about it for 1 full day. Then she had told him, "No, I don't need to see it. I need to know it happened. Those are different things, and only one of them is actually mine." He had looked at her with that expression she had learned to read, the one that meant he was registering something he considered significant. Then he had said, "Yes, that's right." When it was done, he had sent her a single message: "It's over." She had read it standing in the kitchen with the wedding dress finished and folded on the table, and Emilia in the other room explaining to Bep the importance of tides. It's over. She had stood there for a long time holding the phone and feeling the truth of those 2 words, not the distant, theoretical truth of things you hope for and eventually arrive at, but the specific, cellular truth of something ending cleanly, in a form that could be witnessed and confirmed and would not need to be revisited. 14 months. A wrong number. A service door in a church. A breadbasket. A shell on a windowsill. A balcony in the summer night. It was over. She put the phone down and walked to the other room and sat on the floor beside her daughter and said, "Tell me about the tides." And Emilia told her. The weekend after next came. They drove to the coast in Nico's car with Emilia between them in the back seat for most of the journey, and then abruptly asleep across both their laps at a point approximately 40 minutes from the sea, her feet in Sofia's lap, and her head tipped against Nico's arm, with the absolute trust of someone who had decided that this was a safe place to be unconscious. Nico sat very still for the remaining 40 minutes with a sleeping child's head resting against his arm and his face doing the thing it did, the unguarded thing, the interior thing, and Sofia watched him do it and let herself feel everything that watching him do it produced in her chest. The place on the Campanian coast was private in the way that Nico's things were private, not ostentatiously, just specifically. A house on a cliff with steps going down to a small cove. The water the particular blue-green of the Tyrrhenian Sea on a clear day in July. The beach a narrow band of pale sand that looked exactly like the kind of beach where children found the right shell. Emilia woke up when the car stopped and smelled the sea before she saw it. She was out of the car and down the first 3 steps before Sofia had finished unbuckling her seatbelt. Her voice carried back up to them, not words, just the sound of pure uncontained joy, the sound of a 4-year-old encountering the sea in exactly the proportions it deserved to be encountered in. Sofia stood at the top of the cliff steps and watched her daughter go down toward the water and felt the specific quality of that moment, the before and after quality of a day that would live differently in memory from all the days around it. She felt Nico beside her. She did not look at him. She looked at Emilia. "She's going to need a bigger windowsill," Sofia said. "We can arrange that," Nico said. She looked at him then. He was looking at Emilia, his face completely open in a way she understood she was probably one of very few people alive who ever got to see. The man the city knew had another face entirely. This one, watching a child run toward the sea with her arms out and her curls flying and her voice raised to the particular pitch of joy that required no audience and needed no permission. "We," she said. He turned to look at her. "We," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she took his hand the same way she had on the balcony, plain and direct, without ceremony, and they walked down the steps together toward the sea and Emilia and the beach covered in the ordinary, extraordinary abundance of shells. And the water was blue-green and clear, and the summer held everything lightly in its warm, impossible light. Emilia found the right shell in 11 minutes. Small, pale, nearly round, the kind that fit exactly in a palm. She held it up for both of them to see, triumphant and certain. "This one," she announced. "That's the one," Nico confirmed. Emilia looked at him with her direct 4-year-old assessment. She had been doing this less as the days accumulated, looking at him with that assessing attention, as though checking whether what she'd already decided about him was still holding up under subsequent examination. The assessment was becoming, gradually, simply familiarity. The way children accepted things that were good for them. Easily, thoroughly, without requiring the history of why. She pressed the shell into his hand. "You hold it," she said, "so it doesn't get lost while I look for more." Nico looked down at the shell in his palm. Then he looked at Sofia. She looked back at him over her daughter's head, and the thing between them, the thing that had been accumulating since a wrong number rang in a church bathroom, and a stranger answered the phone with the word yes, and came through a service door, because there was a child, was no longer accumulating. It was simply there, present and named and warm in all the ways warmth could be warm when it was the kind that arrived slowly, that built itself out of the specific materials of ordinary days, that did not announce itself because it did not need to. "I'll hold it," he said. Emilia nodded, satisfied, and went back to the water. They stood together on the Campanian shore and watched her go. And the sea was clear, and the summer held everything lightly, and behind them and ahead of them there was still the world with all its complications, the city, the families, the ongoing work of building something out of what they were. But here, right now, there was the water and the child and the shell in his hand and the woman beside him who had called a wrong number and changed everything. And that was sufficient. That was, in the specific arithmetic of everything that mattered, more than enough. Some stories begin in violence and end in peace. Some begin in the ordinary, a Tuesday night, a dead battery, a number dialed wrong in the dark, and become everything. Sofia Mancini had spent 14 months being afraid. She had spent every one of those days surviving it anyway, which is not the same as not being afraid, but is something better. It is the refusal to let fear be the final fact of your life. She had done this for herself and for her daughter and for the version of herself she was not yet, but was moving toward, the one on the other side of everything that had been done to her. She had done it in apartments above dry cleaners, and at sewing machines in small rooms, and in church bathrooms counting seconds, and in every single ordinary morning she got up and kept going when she had every reason to understand what kept going cost. And then she had dialed one wrong number. And a man had answered who asked which church, who came through a service door, who placed a bread basket within reach and remembered a shell on a windowsill and left hearing aids outside a neighbor's door, so she would not feel diminished by needing something. A man who was many things the world knew and one thing the world did not capable, when met by the specific courage of a woman who had kept going against every reason not to, of something the world had not expected from him, of recognizing the right one when he found her. They are still there. The city is still the same city, complicated and indifferent and alive with everything people bring to it. The work continues, his and hers, and the ongoing negotiation of a life built out of two people who had both learned, in different ways and at considerable cost, to know the difference between being noticed and being understood. There are difficult days. There is the ordinary friction of two strong people sharing a world. There is Emilia, who is 4 years old and has no interest in difficulty and a complete commitment to the proposition that every problem contains a solution and the solution is usually more interesting than the problem. There is a windowsill with shells on it. There are more every month. There is a wedding dress in a wardrobe that was finished 8 days after it was due, which the client wore on her wedding day with no knowledge of everything that had happened at the table where it was sewn, and which was, by every account, perfect. There is an orange cat named Bep who comes out at 9 o'clock and has been to the sea once, on the record, and found it acceptable. And there is a woman on a balcony on a summer night, looking at a city she has lived in her whole life and is only now beginning to see clearly, not because the city has changed, but because she is finally standing in it without fear, and beside her, in the warm night air, a man who answered a wrong number and came when she needed him and stayed because she was worth staying for. That is what it looks like. Not rescue, not transaction, not the exchange of one form of dependency for another. Just two people who found each other at the precise intersection of her courage and his, and decided, both of them, freely, clearly, with full knowledge of the cost that whatever came next, they would face it together. Sometimes the arithmetic of desperation produces results that are not what you expected. Sometimes a wrong number is the right one. Sometimes you call out into the void, and the void turns out to have been listening. Thank you so much for staying until the end. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now were made for you. I think you'll love them. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.